On the night before the execution, the condemned man asked only to hug his loyal dog one last time. But when they opened the cell, the animal had vanished without a trace. Seeing the injustice and the pain on his face, everyone froze. Martin Spencer had never been the kind of man to ask for favors. Throughout his 72 years, he'd prided himself on handling life's storms alone, from raising his 2 daughters after his wife's untimely passing, to running a small ranch on the edge of town with almost no hired help. Stubborn independence was etched into his soul, a trait he wore like a badge of honor. Yet there he was, lying on a stiff bed in Glenwood Community Hospital, making the only request that truly mattered to him now. He wanted to be with his dog. Nobody in the ward expected such a plea. Even Dr. Alvarez, who had seen countless final wishes in her decades-long career, paused when Martin, eyes still sharp despite the exhaustion in his face, quietly said, "Bring Tilly to me." Tilly was Martin's faithful border collie mix, a dog known around town for her inquisitive eyes and gentle manner. On calm mornings, neighbors often spotted Martin walking her along the country roads as the sun rose. Rumor had it that Tilly understood him better than any human ever had. They moved in effortless sync, dog and man, as though they shared one heartbeat. Dr. Alvarez offered Martin a soft smile, noticing how his breathing was becoming labored. "You're sure that's all you want, Mr. Spencer? We can arrange for your daughters to come back from out of state. We can reach out to old friends." Martin cut her off with a slow shake of his head. "I just want Tilly," he repeated, voice steady. So Dr. Alvarez made a promise to do everything in her power to bring that dog to the hospital. Little did anyone know that this simple wish would set off a chain of events that nobody, not even the most imaginative nurse in Glenwood, could have predicted. Across town, Tilly was perched anxiously on the front porch of the Spencer Ranch. She knew something was off. The last time Martin left in a rush, he returned the same evening, albeit with a bruised rib from wrangling a runaway calf. This time he'd been gone 2 days, and the silence in the wooden house gnawed at her. Whenever a car pulled up, Tilly would trot to the driveway, tail wagging in cautious hope, only to retreat when it wasn't Martin who stepped out. One of Martin's neighbors, Mrs. Daly, had been stopping by to fill Tilly's food dish and check on the ranch, but the dog's eyes never strayed far from the road. She was waiting. At the hospital, Martin's condition began to decline faster than Dr. Alvarez had anticipated. While he was stable enough to speak, his vitals showed stress, and repeated tests confirmed the doctor's shared concern. His lungs were failing. Treatments that once slowed his pneumonia no longer seemed effective. Every hour, Martin drifted into longer spells of shallow sleep, rousing himself only when nurses came to check his blood pressure or administer medication. Dr. Alvarez hoped that fulfilling his request, uniting him with Tilly, might give him the mental spark he needed to keep fighting. She'd seen small miracles happen when a patient's spirits lifted at just the right moment, but time was running short. No one in Glenwood Community Hospital had ever smuggled a dog into a patient's room before, and there were protocols forbidding animals past the lobby, except for trained service dogs. Nonetheless, Dr. Alvarez was determined. She rallied a few sympathetic staff members, including Nurse Jill, who knew Martin from childhood. Jill had grown up with Martin's daughters and remembered the bright-eyed man who would fix bikes for all the neighborhood kids. She recalled, too, how after Martin lost his wife, Tilly was the one who pulled him out of a deep grief. Jill was certain the dog's presence might be just what Martin needed. Meanwhile, Mrs. Daly received a phone call, Dr. Alvarez on the other line politely asking if she'd drive Tilly to the hospital. Mrs. Daly wasn't so sure it was allowed, but the doctor's calm yet urgent tone overrode her hesitations. Within an hour, she had coaxed Tilly into the back of her minivan with a promise of seeing Martin. Tilly, for her part, hopped in without a single bark, as though she sensed something significant was happening. When they arrived, The hospital's front desk staff exchanged uneasy glances, but Dr. Alvarez had left explicit instructions: send them straight to room 214. They took the service elevator to avoid crowds, Mrs. Daly whispering gentle reassurances to Tilly the entire time. The dog's ears were alert, her gaze fixed on the elevator doors as though expecting them to open right into Martin's arms. Inside room 214, Martin was awake, but only just. His youngest daughter, Jenna, had managed to catch the first flight out and now stood at the foot of his bed, tears brimming. She hadn't visited in months. Her high-stress job in the city always got in the way, and guilt weighed on her as she watched her father, once so robust, now so frail. Dr. Alvarez had told her about Martin's request and that Tilly was on her way. "Dad," Jenna said softly, voice breaking, "you really think it'll help to see Tilly right now?" Martin gave a weak nod. "Always helped me before," he whispered, eyes drifting closed again. Not a minute later, there was a gentle knock, and Mrs. Daly peeked in, Tilly at her side. Dr. Alvarez ushered them forward. In that brief moment, the entire atmosphere of the hospital room shifted, like the first warm breeze after a harsh winter. Tilly padded across the floor tiles without hesitation, bypassing tubes and monitors to place her front paws lightly on the edge of Martin's bed. Her tail wagged in slow circles as if mindful of the machines around them. Martin's eyes opened at the soft sound of nails clicking on the floor, and when he saw his dog, a faint spark lit behind his tired gaze. Jenna moved aside, pressing a hand to her mouth in gratitude and sorrow. She watched Tilly gently nose Martin's outstretched hand, then rest her chin against his arm. Anyone observing that moment might have assumed it was just a heartwarming reunion, a sweet end-of-life comfort for a man who had given so much of himself to others. But they would have been mistaken. Something else took shape in that room, something far more profound. As Martin's breath slowed, Tilly let out a low whine that made the hairs on Jenna's arms stand up. Dr. Alvarez checked Martin's pulse, her expression darkening. His blood pressure was dropping fast. Realizing how dire the situation was, Jenna lowered her head to Martin's, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. "Dad, please," she murmured, voice trembling, "stay with us a little longer." But Martin's gaze had moved from his daughter's face to Tilly's. "Thank you," he whispered to the dog, though no one was certain he even had the strength to speak. "You always kept me going." Tilly responded by licking his hand, eyes wide and intent, as though trying to pour her own vitality into him. Suddenly, Martin's monitors erupted in a chorus of beeps. Dr. Alvarez rushed to administer oxygen, shouting for assistance. Nurses flooded in with equipment, and Jenna was guided away from the bed. Tilly retreated a few steps, ears flattened, sensing the panic in the air. For a moment, it looked like Martin had slipped past the point of no return. But then something almost impossible occurred. Amidst the frantic attempts to stabilize him, Martin's heart rate steadied. The lines on the monitor began to even out, and his pulse, though weak, regained a steadier rhythm. Dr. Alvarez exhaled a stunned breath. "He's fighting again," she murmured. "He's actually stabilizing." Tilly let out a short bark, sharp, but not frantic. The dog's eyes never left Martin. Jenna, clinging to the rails of the bed, stared at her father as if seeing him for the first time in years. And in that moment, she realized the final request to be with his dog hadn't just been about comfort. It was about hope. In the aftermath of the crisis, Martin's condition, shockingly, showed slight improvement. He remained weak, but his vitals were stronger than they'd been in days. Even the hospital's senior specialists were at a loss for a medical explanation. One perplexed doctor joked that Glenwood would soon become known as the place where miracle dogs roam the halls. But Dr. Alvarez didn't see it as a joke. She believed deeply in the power of emotional bonds on healing, and Tilly's presence had unleashed some hidden reserve of life in Martin. While modern medicine played its role, there was something else at work, a fierce loyalty that spanned across species. Word of Martin and Tilly's story spread through the corridors. Patients asked if they too could have visits from their pets. Nurses swapped theories. Some insisted that Tilly must have sensed Martin's failing health and offered him the silent encouragement he needed to hang on. Others, though touched, remained skeptical that this was anything more than a lucky coincidence. Regardless of the theories, Tilly wasn't going anywhere. By quiet arrangement with Dr. Alvarez, she stayed in Martin's room overnight, curled on a blanket near his bed. Whenever he stirred, her ears would twitch, and she'd get up to check on him, gently nuzzling his hand. Jenna watched this routine with a curious ache in her heart. She'd grown up alongside Tilly's predecessors, generations of border collies her father had always kept. But she had never stopped to wonder if maybe those dogs offered more than just herding skills or companionship. Watching Tilly care for her father woke something in her, a realization of all the times she missed connecting with Martin because she'd been too busy climbing the corporate ladder in a distant city. As she saw Tilly's unwavering devotion, Jenna thought, if a dog could love him this much, maybe I should have tried harder to show that same love. The next morning, as the earliest sunshine trickled through the drawn curtains, Martin's eyes opened again. He looked down at Tilly, who blinked up at him. Dr. Alvarez, making her rounds, did a double take at how alert Martin appeared. "Mr. Spencer," she said, stepping closer, "how do you feel?" He gave a small shrug, voice still raspy. "Better than I have in days," he admitted. Tilly wagged her tail so hard that it thumped against the side of the bed. "I think it's thanks to her," Martin added. Though it was too early to call it a recovery, the improvement held. Martin ate a little more at breakfast and managed to stay awake longer than a few minutes. He even cracked a joke when Nurse Jill came in to take his temperature, telling her she hadn't changed since she was a kid riding bikes around his ranch. Jill's eyes shone with tears as she teased him back, quietly thanking Tilly for helping her old neighbor come around. But the day was far from over, and the doctor's cautious optimism couldn't fully mask an underlying concern. Martin was still fragile. A pneumonia that severe doesn't disappear overnight, no matter how remarkable one's will to live might be. Dr. Alvarez insisted on more tests and chest x-rays, preparing for every possibility. Jenna, on the other hand, was grappling with her own guilt and longing. Sitting by Martin's side, she admitted, "I wish I had been here more often. Maybe if I'd known sooner how bad it was, I could have helped." Martin offered her a gentle smile that made her eyes burn with unshed tears. "We all choose different paths, honey. I'm just glad you're here now." That afternoon, something curious happened. As Martin dozed, Tilly became agitated. The dog started pacing near the bed, letting out low whimpers and glancing repeatedly at the door. Jenna tried to calm her, offering treats from the cafeteria, but Tilly refused to settle. Her gaze locked on the hallway as though she expected an unwelcome visitor. Minutes later, a woman in a crisp suit arrived. She introduced herself as Veronica Lewis from Redwood County Health Administration, demanding to see the hospital's director. According to new policy, no animals, apart from certified service dogs, were allowed to stay on site. Dr. Alvarez explained the special circumstance, but Ms. Lewis wasn't swayed. "We have guidelines for a reason," Ms. Lewis stated icily. "If we make one exception, we're forced to make countless others." She cast a disapproving look at Tilly. Jenna fumed, but Dr. Alvarez attempted a measured tone. "Mr. Spencer's health has shown clear improvement. I believe Tilly is partly responsible. Removing her could endanger his progress." Ms. Lewis looked unconvinced. "I'm afraid the policy is clear," she insisted. "You have 24 hours to make alternative arrangements for this dog." By the time she swept out of the corridor, Tilly seemed restless and upset, picking up on the tension. Jenna sat in shock, and Dr. Alvarez's frustration was palpable. Martin, awakened by the commotion, asked what was going on. When Jenna told him the hospital might force Tilly to leave, his face tightened with worry. "She's my lifeline," he murmured. "If they take her away—" He trailed off, as if the thought alone was too heavy to complete. Dr. Alvarez squeezed Martin's hand gently. "We'll figure something out," she promised, though how, she wasn't sure. A scramble began within the hour. Nurses, staff, and even a few patients banding together to protest. Some suggested registering Tilly as an emotional support animal, but that process could take weeks or months. Others offered to sneak her in quietly each morning, but the risk was high if Ms. Lewis returned for a surprise inspection. Jenna, desperate for a solution, placed calls to local authorities, to media outlets that might highlight Martin's plight, hoping public pressure would force the hospital administrators to allow Tilly to stay. Meanwhile, Tilly wouldn't leave Martin's room. She remained by his bed, occasionally raising her head as the staff's voices carried urgent whispers from the hallway, and so began a countdown of 24 hours. Martin's final request had been granted for only a fleeting moment in time, and now faced revocation. Nobody dared predict what might happen if Tilly was indeed taken from his side. The entire hospital braced for a standoff, uncertain whether love and compassion could triumph over rigid bureaucracy. What they didn't know was that Tilly had one more surprise in store, a shock that would make the entire health administration question the limits of their own rules and reveal just how unbreakable the bond between a man and his beloved dog could be. Tilly's restlessness only grew as the day wore on, as though she could sense the invisible countdown. By late afternoon, the halls of Glenwood Community Hospital buzzed with murmurs. Patients and staff alike whispered about the looming deadline, and more than one nurse openly questioned why the administration would be so rigid. Even the hospital director, a pragmatic man named Mr. Davison, was unnerved by the sudden escalation. He confessed privately to Dr. Alvarez that he had never felt so conflicted about a rule. But Redwood County Health Administration had been tightening regulations in multiple facilities, and Ms. Veronica Lewis's reputation for strict compliance was almost legendary. Dr. Alvarez, determined and furious in equal measure, mulled over every possible loophole. Registering Tilly as a service dog was the cleanest option, but it required paperwork, evaluations, and official approvals that couldn't possibly be completed overnight. Jenna, pacing anxiously near the nurse's station, suggested calling local news outlets, hoping public outcry might pressure Ms. Lewis into backing down, but media attention was unpredictable. It might bring more scrutiny rather than less, and Dr. Alvarez didn't want to risk escalating the conflict into a full-blown standoff that could see Tilly forcibly removed. In Martin's room, tension clung to the air like the humidity before a thunderstorm. The old man alternated between bouts of shallow sleep and anxious wakefulness, his gaze always returning to Tilly. The dog hadn't left his side since Ms. Lewis stormed out. She even refused to accompany the nurses on quick walks in the courtyard, as though she knew her minutes there were numbered. Martin's daughter sat by the bed, tears in her eyes, while Tilly lay curled at Martin's feet, offering silent reassurance. That evening, as hospital staff finished their shifts, something peculiar happened in the corridor outside Martin's room. A 7-year-old patient named Nora, famous among the nurses for her shy demeanor, wandered out of the pediatric wing. She'd been admitted with a complicated fracture and felt isolated after weeks of limited mobility. When she heard about a magical dog that brought a dying man back from the brink, her curiosity overcame her usual reserve. Holding herself upright with a small crutch, Nora peered into Martin's room from the doorway. Tilly, sensing the child's presence, lifted her head. Her ears perked and her tail did a slow, friendly wag. The girl ventured a step closer. She and Tilly locked eyes, and for a long moment, Nora seemed to forget her apprehension. Slowly, Tilly rose and padded toward the child, greeting her with that gentle sway of the tail. Nora sank to the floor, crutch clattering beside her, tears welling as she buried both hands in Tilly's neck fur. The dog nuzzled the child's cheek as if to ask, "Why are you crying?" Martin stirred, noticing the small figure by the door. He motioned for Jenna to help the child up. "It's all right," Martin said weakly. "She can stay. Tilly doesn't mind." Nora's eyes widened at the invitation, and Jenna helped her settle into a chair while Tilly rested her chin on the girl's lap. A hush fell over the room as though some gentle force had stepped in to calm everyone's nerves. Dr. Alvarez happened to pass by, saw the scene, and lingered quietly. She watched Nora's hunched shoulders relax. The little girl began telling Tilly about how she missed her cat at home, how she felt lonely at night, how she wanted to run again. Tilly listened, gaze steady, occasionally licking Nora's hand as if promising that better days were coming. Martin, drifting in and out of a light doze, smiled whenever he caught a word of Nora's soft monologue. "I might call it a miracle," Dr. Alvarez whispered to Jenna, stepping aside so as not to disturb the moment. "I've seen therapy dogs before, but Tilly's connection with people is beyond anything I've witnessed." Jenna nodded, her eyes misty. "You think Ms. Lewis cares about a moment like this?" she asked bitterly. "The rules are all that matter to her." Dr. Alvarez sighed. "Not necessarily. She might have her reasons. But time's running out. If we can't resolve this, Tilly will be forced out by tomorrow afternoon." Morning arrived with heavy gray skies, as if nature herself felt the weight of the hospital's collective worry. Dr. Alvarez and Mr. Davison had spent half the night combing legal documents, searching for ways to classify Tilly's presence as part of a recognized therapeutic protocol. They discovered obscure clauses about compassionate care exceptions, but quickly realized Ms. Lewis could just as easily claim they were misusing those rules. Midway through the morning, a small group of local residents gathered outside the main entrance. Word had spread about Martin's story, and animal lovers from various parts of the county had arrived to hold signs reading, "Let Tilly stay," and "A man's last wish matters." The protest was peaceful but insistent, capturing the attention of passers-by. Even a local news van pulled up to interview the small crowd, though the station's coverage might not air until later that evening. Inside the hospital, Ms. Lewis arrived earlier than anyone expected, marching in with a folder of paperwork. She demanded an immediate meeting with the director, Dr. Alvarez, and any other key decision-makers. Tilly was safe in Martin's room for the moment, but tension soared. Jenna, forced to remain behind, clenched her fists in frustration. Martin had awakened that morning slightly more alert, but the stress of losing Tilly hung over him like a dark cloud. "Don't worry," he said, forcing a reassuring tone that was belied by the tremor in his voice. "We'll figure out something. We always do, Tilly girl." Tilly rested her head on the bed, gazing up at him with such unwavering trust that it made Jenna's heart ache. Meanwhile, in the conference room, Ms. Lewis calmly flipped through her documents. "This facility is bound by Redwood County policies," she began, not bothering with pleasantries. "We have guidelines prohibiting animals outside of licensed therapy programs, and I see no official classification for this dog. Unless your staff can produce the required documentation, the dog must be removed by 2 p.m. today." Mr. Davison cleared his throat. "We understand your point, Ms. Lewis, but Dr. Alvarez here can testify to the dramatic improvement in Mr. Spencer's condition. We're dealing with a potentially life-saving emotional bond." Ms. Lewis raised an eyebrow. "Anecdotal evidence," she countered coolly. "We cannot base policy on stories, touching though they may be." Dr. Alvarez, trying to keep her composure, laid out her own folder of medical charts. "These are Mr. Spencer's vitals before and after Tilly arrived. she explained. His oxygen levels improved substantially. That's not just anecdote, it's quantifiable. Ms. Lewis barely glanced at the figures. I see only correlation, not causation, and besides, Redwood's policy is quite explicit. Mr. Davison leaned forward. Is there no exception we could apply? He asked softly. We're discussing a man's final request. Ms. Lewis's expression shifted for the briefest moment, as though something weighed on her conscience. Then she set her jaw. I'm sorry, but the guidelines stand. In extremely rare cases, we might consider a last-hour bedside visit, but not an extended stay of multiple days. The dog must leave. Dr. Alvarez felt a wave of helpless anger surge. You have the power to make an exception, she said, voice shaking, but you're choosing not to. Why? Is this really about following rules, or is there something else behind it? Ms. Lewis stiffened. I don't appreciate your insinuation. My duty is to uphold standards that protect both patients and staff. I don't have to justify them beyond that. She rose from her chair. It's almost noon. The dog must be gone by 2 p.m. Outside the conference room, staff milled about waiting. Ms. Lewis strode past without a word, heading for the elevator. Her departure signaled the hospital's short-lived relief from her presence, but no one felt any real comfort. She would return to ensure compliance. Dr. Alvarez, fists clenched at her sides, emerged with Mr. Davison to break the news. Jenna's eyes filled with anger and despair. We have 2 hours, was all Dr. Alvarez managed to say. With the clock ticking, an impromptu meeting formed in the hallway just outside Martin's room. Jenna, Nurse Jill, Dr. Alvarez, Mr. Davison, and a few other staff members who refused to stand by in silence. They tossed around wild ideas, forging the service dog papers, sneaking Tilly out and back in under a different name, transferring Martin to a smaller clinic known to be more lenient. Every suggestion had an obvious risk or flaw. Then Nurse Jill proposed something unconventional. Remember last night that little girl from the pediatric wing? Tilly helped her too. She looked around, excitement budding in her expression. What if we gather testimonies from multiple patients who benefited from Tilly's presence? If Redwood is so concerned about official classification, let's show them Tilly is already providing therapy. Dr. Alvarez brightened. It might not make Redwood instantly cave, but it's a stronger case than a single anecdote. Mr. Davison nodded, though he remained cautious. The question is, will Ms. Lewis even read it? He asked. And do we have enough time to compile anything substantial before 2 p.m.? We can try, Jenna said, voice cracking but resolute. She exchanged a look with Tilly, who rested at Martin's side. For my dad, and for Tilly, I'll do whatever it takes. They sprang into action. Nurse Jill and a handful of volunteers hurried to interview patients who'd encountered Tilly, scribbling notes about lowered anxiety, improved mood, or other intangible yet real benefits. Dr. Alvarez gathered Martin's updated medical charts, highlighting the positive changes in his vital signs. Mr. Davison made calls to Redwood County's main office, hoping a sympathetic ear might expedite an emergency reevaluation. Jenna snapped pictures. Tilly with Martin, Tilly greeting Nora, Tilly comforting another elderly patient down the hall. The hallway buzzed with frantic energy, the sense of a last-ditch effort to outrun the clock. Meanwhile, Martin, though physically weak, sensed the commotion. They're fighting for you, Tilly, he murmured to the dog, trying to force a reassuring smile. Maybe this hospital and Redwood County will realize you do more good here than they'll ever know. Tilly, as if understanding, placed her paws gently on the bed and nudged his hand. Outside, the small protest grew slightly in number. A few more people from the community arrived with signs, including an elderly rancher who'd known Martin for decades. The local TV crew filmed the gathering, capturing interviews from neighbors who praised Martin's generosity and Tilly's gentle nature. Inside the hospital, staff raced to finish their haphazard therapy dog portfolio, a rushed collection of testimonies and data. By 1:30 p.m., the clock seemed to sneer at them. In the final half hour, Ms. Lewis returned, the click of her heels echoing ominously across the gleaming floor. She headed straight for Martin's room, folder in hand, prepared to oversee Tilly's removal herself. Dr. Alvarez and Jenna hurried to intercept her, thrusting the sheaf of papers into her hands. "These are statements from patients, doctors, nurses," Dr. Alvarez said, voice trembling but determined. "We have documented evidence that Tilly's presence is therapeutic." Ms. Lewis shot them a glance of annoyance. "A dog can be comforting, yes, but that doesn't make it an officially certified therapy animal." She flipped through the pages, her expression hardening. "These are personal stories, not recognized credentials. Surely the administration can grant a compassionate extension," pleaded Jenna, tears threatening to spill. "My father is still in a precarious state. Removing Tilly now could—" "I'm sorry," Ms. Lewis interrupted, snapping the folder shut. "But Redwood's policy is clear. Unless there's an immediate life-threatening emergency that demands Tilly's presence, she has to go." As if on cue, a shrill alarm blared from farther down the corridor. Code Blue echoed through the speakers. Someone was in critical distress. Dr. Alvarez's head snapped toward the sound. Nurses scrambled, pushing a crash cart into a room in the opposite wing. At first, Ms. Lewis appeared annoyed by the sudden interruption, but then a nurse ran past, shouting for Dr. Alvarez specifically, something about a complication in the pediatric ward. Dr. Alvarez darted away, followed instinctively by Ms. Lewis, who seemed drawn toward the commotion despite herself. Jenna hesitated, torn between chasing them and staying with Martin. At that moment, Martin motioned weakly for her to go. "See if it's that little girl, Nora," he whispered. "She doesn't have anyone else here." Reluctantly, Jenna hurried after the others, leaving Tilly behind. In the pediatric wing, Dr. Alvarez found a team of nurses surrounding Nora, whose face was pale and contorted with pain. Her breathing was shallow, and the monitors displayed erratic vitals. Ms. Lewis stood near the doorway, arms folded, face pinched in concern. Nobody had time to question or usher her out. Dr. Alvarez quickly scanned the monitors and recognized a complication related to Nora's old fracture, possibly an embolism or infection. The child was slipping into shock. Nurse Jill sprinted up breathless, holding an oxygen mask. Dr. Alvarez examined Nora's chart, heart pounding. "We need to calm her. Her panic is making her breathing worse," she said urgently. "If that fracture caused any clotting—" She didn't finish. Another alarm pierced the air, and Nora's tiny body shook. In that dreadful instant, Ms. Lewis stepped back, her professional facade wavering at the sight of a child in crisis. She looked at the nurses scrambling, then at Dr. Alvarez's tense face. Her voice came out in a near whisper, betraying an unexpected tremor of fear. "What can be done?" Jenna arrived at the same time, nearly colliding with Ms. Lewis at the entrance. "We need Tilly," she exclaimed, desperation fueling her words. "Nora's terrified, and Tilly calmed her before." Ms. Lewis visibly tensed. "This isn't the time for sentiment. The child needs medical intervention." "She needs both," Jenna insisted, gripping Ms. Lewis's arm. "Tilly's presence helped Nora breathe and relax. That might buy the doctors precious time to stabilize her." Without waiting for permission, Dr. Alvarez looked at Nurse Jill. "Go get Tilly," she ordered. Jill darted away, leaving Ms. Lewis torn between objecting or staying silent. Seconds stretched agonizingly as Nora's condition worsened. A sense of controlled panic gripped the medical staff. Dr. Alvarez administered medication, and one nurse tried to soothe Nora, but the girl was delirious with pain and fear. Then they heard the scuffle of paws on linoleum. Nurse Jill emerged, Tilly racing at her side, tail low but determined, a single-minded focus in her eyes. In one fluid motion, Tilly approached the bed. Dr. Alvarez lowered a bed rail so Tilly could place her paws near Nora's shoulder. The dog gently pressed her muzzle against the girl's cheek, letting out a soft whine. Nora's wild gaze flickered toward Tilly. Recognition dawned, even through her haze of pain. Her breathing, though still labored, slowed fractionally. Ms. Lewis, standing in stunned silence, watched as Tilly continued to offer that calming presence. A nurse repeated Nora's vitals, still critical, but slightly improved. "We've got a window," Dr. Alvarez shouted, motioning for everyone to keep going. With swift precision, the medical team acted, administering advanced measures to stabilize Nora's heart rate. Over the next few minutes, the frantic beeping of monitors decreased. While far from out of danger, Nora no longer gasped for breath as if drowning. Her eyes drifted shut, exhaustion overtaking panic. And still, Tilly did not move away. Nobody in the room, including Ms. Lewis, could deny the significance of what they'd just witnessed. The dog had given them the break they needed to treat the medical emergency. When the chaos finally died down, Dr. Alvarez removed her gloves and exhaled, tears of relief gathering in her eyes. "She's stable," she whispered. "It'll be touch and go for a bit, but she's stable." Jenna hugged Nurse Jill, both trembling with the aftermath of the crisis. Tilly hopped back to the floor, panting. Then she turned and locked eyes with Ms. Lewis. The official's posture sagged, and she blinked rapidly, as though trying to reconcile the scene with the rulebook etched in her head. For a moment, Ms. Lewis looked like she might bolt or say something dismissive. Instead, she murmured, I'll need to make a call." Her voice held none of its earlier iron. In the corridor, Ms. Lewis paced, phone to her ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. Jenna stood at a distance, listening to the faint echo of words like exception, emergency, and evaluation. The expression on Ms. Lewis's face was difficult to read, but at last, she disconnected the call and faced Jenna. "Redwood County Health Administration will allow Tilly to remain," Ms. Lewis said, almost as if reciting lines she hadn't planned to deliver, "under a temporary compassionate exemption pending official therapy dog accreditation." Jenna's knees nearly buckled with relief. She had to restrain herself from hugging Ms. Lewis outright. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you so much." Ms. Lewis pursed her lips. She cast a glance toward Nora's room where Tilly still hovered protectively. "You may want to speak to Redwood about fast-tracking this dog's accreditation. Clearly she's special." With that, Ms. Lewis stepped aside, letting Jenna rush to tell Martin the news. Dr. Alvarez, watching from a few steps away, felt her own eyes sting with tears of gratitude. Martin's final request to be with his dog had not only given him hope, but it might also have saved Nora's life. And in the face of that undeniable power, even the strictest rules had to bend. Within minutes of Redwood County Health Administration's decision, news of Tilly's compassionate exemption spread throughout Glenwood Community Hospital. Staff members and patients alike breathed collective relief, applauding the sudden turn of events. Even those who had harbored doubts about a dog roaming the halls recognized that Tilly's presence had become essential. Martin Spencer, still confined to his bed, managed the widest smile he'd worn since arriving at the hospital. His grip on Tilly's paw was unwavering, and the dog gently pressed her muzzle to his palm in return, as though ensuring him that their bond would remain intact no matter what came next. Jenna lingered by the window, watching the small protest group outside gradually disperse now that Tilly was allowed to stay. The local news crew packed up their cameras, promising to air the story that evening. Dr. Alvarez, still reeling from the drama in the pediatric unit, leaned against the doorframe of Martin's room, scanning the monitors that beeped a steady rhythm for her patient. Martin's vitals had stabilized further since the previous day. A surprise to many, though Jenna suspected Tilly's presence played a larger role than anyone dared to admit out loud. Even Ms. Lewis, after witnessing Tilly's effect on Nora, had left the hospital with an expression that suggested her once ironclad convictions had begun to crack. Tilly herself refused to leave Martin's side, except for brief supervised trips outside to relieve herself or to check in on Nora. Somehow, the dog managed to split her attention between the elderly rancher who had made his final request and the young girl who'd nearly lost her life to sudden complications. Each time Tilly padded down the hallway to the pediatric wing, she brought calm to a place otherwise filled with hushed anxieties. Nurses joked that Tilly was the new favorite staff member, but behind their levity lay genuine awe. Something about that border collie mix seemed to transcend the usual definition of just a pet. Word reached Redwood's main office that the hospital community was rallying around Tilly, collecting personal testimonies and data about her impact on patients' stress levels, pain management, and overall morale. To expedite the process, Dr. Alvarez secured an emergency visit from a certified therapy dog evaluator, a woman named Teresa Huffman, who volunteered her expertise when she heard of Tilly's unusual story. Huffman had spent decades training and assessing dogs for therapy programs across the state and believed strongly in bridging the gap between medical protocol and the emotional support that animals could provide. When Teresa Huffman arrived late that afternoon, she wore the same calm demeanor one might expect from a seasoned professional. She introduced herself briefly to Martin, who mustered enough strength to greet her. Then she knelt beside Tilly, letting the dog sniff her hands before gently patting Tilly's side. "You've made quite the stir," she murmured to Tilly, smiling when the dog responded by stepping closer. Huffman glanced at Dr. Alvarez. "If half the stories I've heard are true," she said softly, "this dog is a natural candidate for immediate certification. Let's see if she meets the behavioral standards." A small group gathered in the hallway to observe the process. Jenna clutched Martin's hospital gown in one hand, anxious to see if Tilly would pass. Huffman began with routine tests, checking Tilly's response to sudden noises, strangers approaching, gentle restraint, and other stimuli that might occur in a hospital environment. Tilly excelled at every challenge, responding calmly or with polite interest. Even when a staff member purposely dropped a metal tray nearby to simulate a stressful situation, Tilly merely lifted her ears, then glanced at Huffman as though asking permission to investigate. The onlookers exchanged approving looks, hearts lifting with each success. Nora's parents also watched from a short distance, holding their daughter's hand. Though still frail, Nora had insisted on seeing Tilly during the evaluation. She leaned against her mother's side, eyes shining with the same admiration most patients felt for the friendly dog. Occasionally, Tilly turned her head to check on Nora, wagging her tail in recognition, and the girl would smile as though everything in the world was momentarily perfect. Huffman couldn't help but notice this connection and added a few more notes to her clipboard, her gaze soft with understanding. Halfway through the assessment, Martin's cough intensified inside his room. Concerned, Dr. Alvarez ducked back in to check on him, leaving Jenna to watch Tilly's progress. Although Redwood County's official sign-off required more paperwork and official channels, Huffman's professional endorsement carried substantial weight in the medical community. If Tilly passed all criteria for therapy dog certification, Ms. Lewis would have far less ground to stand on if she tried to remove Tilly in the future. When Huffman concluded her final test, she stood and gave a slight nod to the observers. "I'm prepared to issue a provisional certification," she announced. "Tilly has the temperament, the focus, and the empathy required for therapy work in a clinical setting. I'll expedite the formal documents so that Redwood can't dispute her status." Jenna felt a knot of tension ease from her chest. She crouched to wrap Tilly in a grateful hug. Although Tilly didn't understand every word, her tail wagged in happy confusion at the surge of relief emanating from all around her. Yet, even as the halls buzzed with quiet celebration, Martin's condition took a sudden and disconcerting turn. Later that night, his fever spiked unexpectedly. Despite the improvement in his oxygen levels, a new wave of infection seemed to be assailing him. Dr. Alvarez and her team launched an aggressive course of antibiotics. They placed him on stronger respiratory support, carefully monitoring each fluctuation in vital signs. Tilly remained near the bed, letting out soft whimpers whenever Martin's breathing grew ragged. Jenna sat in the corner, exhaustion etched into her face as she observed the unpredictable roller coaster her father was riding. Once again, the hospital staff found themselves teetering between hope and worry. Nora, discharged from the pediatric unit but waiting on final test results, asked permission to see Martin. Her parents guided her gently into his room, where she offered a shy wave to the sleeping man. Tilly stood to greet Nora, pressing her muzzle to the girl's hand as if to say, "He'll pull through. Don't be scared." Nora spoke in a hushed voice, promising Martin she'd walk Tilly around his ranch if he got better, that she'd help feed the chickens she'd heard about from the other nurses. Perhaps it was a naive promise, but in that moment, the sincerity of a child's vow felt like magic. Dr. Alvarez noticed that Tilly began pacing again, almost identical to her previous behavior when Martin first deteriorated. A worried crease formed between Dr. Alvarez's brows. It was uncanny how the dog's instincts seemed tied to Martin's health, reacting even before the monitors caught certain changes. Twice, Tilly alerted the nurses by whining at Martin's side just moments before an alarm signaled a dip in his oxygen saturation. Observing this pattern, Dr. Alvarez was convinced that Tilly's intuition ran deeper than mere coincidence. She began noting each instance in Martin's chart, labeling them Tilly alerts. Jenna, battered by fear, clung to small positives. Martin's blood pressure remained relatively stable. His overall organ function looked better than it had days ago, and Tilly's unwavering vigilance kept them from missing any subtle sign of distress. But the infection was serious, and Dr. Alvarez privately cautioned her staff to remain prepared for the worst. "Pneumonia at his age is always dangerous, especially with these recurrent flare-ups," she warned, "but we'll keep fighting. He's not given up yet." In the early hours, when exhaustion weighed on everyone, Tilly perched on a chair near Martin. Jenna had fallen asleep at the foot of the bed, while a nurse dozed in a hallway seat between rounds. In the hush of that pre-dawn calm, Martin's eyes fluttered open. He couldn't sit up without pain, and his breathing was shallow, but he managed to rest a trembling hand on Tilly's head. In that quiet moment, without the swirl of doctors or visitors, Martin whispered secrets to Tilly. Perhaps he was recounting cherished memories, or maybe sharing regrets and hopes no one else would ever hear. Tilly stayed still as stone, letting Martin's rasping voice flow over her ears, occasionally responding with a gentle nuzzle. Then, in a moment that felt more dream than reality, Martin's weak fingers fumbled on the side of the bed, searching until Tilly placed her paw in his palm. A sharp tear escaped Martin's eye. He breathed a broken sentence about how he'd once rescued Tilly from a flooded ditch, how she'd been meant to go a year earlier when she had a medical scare, but she held on. "You've done more for me than I ever did for you," he said, voice quivering. "I'm so glad we got this time." An hour after sunrise, Dr. Alvarez entered the room to find Martin sleeping peacefully, Tilly curled against his leg. Jenna was awake, eyes puffy but hopeful. "He had a restful night for the most part," she reported. "Tilly only seemed anxious once around 3 in the morning, but Dad's vitals never dipped too far." Dr. Alvarez did her usual checks and found that Martin's fever was slightly lower. "It's promising," she murmured, though she had learned to be cautious with any improvement. Still, any sign of progress was a welcome relief. Outside, the hospital's new celebrity, Tilly, attracted steady attention, Staff asked to photograph her, and local volunteers offered to groom her or bring fresh treats. Redwood's official therapy dog paperwork was underway, thanks to Teresa Huffman's favorable report. Meanwhile, Ms. Lewis's abrupt reversal had been documented in internal memos, which Mr. Davison made sure to file securely in case Redwood attempted to backtrack. But Ms. Lewis herself had not returned, nor had she issued any new statements. Quietly, the entire facility wondered if Tilly's presence had softened her stance indefinitely. As midday approached, Nora came bearing a homemade "Get Well Soon" card, assisted by her mother. The bright paper was plastered with crayon drawings of Tilly, Martin, and a big cartoon heart. "Dad and I are going home today," Nora whispered, "but I wanted Mr. Spencer to have this." She stepped into the room, and Tilly trotted over to greet her with a happy wag. Martin roused from a light doze and managed a tired smile as Nora handed him the card. "We can't lose you yet," she said in a small voice. "Who's going to let me feed the chickens if you don't get better?" A lump rose in Jenna's throat. Martin, voice shaky, replied, "We'll make it happen, kiddo. You'll see." Tilly hopped onto a chair, sniffing the card's colorful edges, and gave Nora's arm a playful lick. The girl giggled, and for a moment the entire mood in the room turned light, as if no one dared remember how serious Martin's condition had been hours earlier. Dr. Alvarez hovered close by, checking Martin's oxygen levels, inwardly astonished at how his stats seemed better every time Tilly or Nora interacted with him. But just as hope began to bloom again, the unexpected happened. While finishing an afternoon consult with another patient, Dr. Alvarez received a frantic page. Martin was in respiratory distress. She sprinted down the hallway, bracing herself for the familiar wail of alarms, only to find that Martin's monitors were stable, no alarms screaming. Confused, she rushed in to see Martin struggling to breathe, Tilly barking, and Jenna desperately calling for help. A glitch in the monitor's wiring had kept the machines from registering a sudden drop in oxygen. If Tilly hadn't barked, the staff might not have noticed until it was too late. Dr. Alvarez quickly administered additional oxygen and medications, her mind racing as she realized how close they had come to losing him again. Tilly's barking had been the only alert. "He's slipping," Dr. Alvarez muttered under her breath, struggling to find a reason for these repeated setbacks. Jenna felt her heart plunge watching the nurses reposition Martin, adjusting tubes and IV drips. The final request repeated in her mind: he wants to be with his dog. But was that enough to keep him in this world? Could even Tilly's miraculous presence outmaneuver an infection so vicious and unrelenting? The afternoon stretched into a blur of procedures and frantic attempts to stabilize Martin once more. Tilly was ushered out temporarily while the medical team worked, pressing every resource they had into Martin's care. In the hallway, Tilly paced, whining in short, worried bursts. Jenna stood beside her, stroking the dog's fur with a trembling hand. A hush fell over the corridor as staff and visitors alike realized that Martin's life now hung by a thread. A full hour later, Dr. Alvarez emerged, removing her surgical mask with an exhausted sigh. "He's alive," she said, addressing Jenna, "but unconscious. We had to put him on a ventilator to manage his breathing. We'll see how he does overnight." Then, turning to Tilly, whose ears were pinned back with anxiety, she added gently, "You can come back in now. He needs you, even if he can't say so." With an escort of hushed staff and a terrified daughter, Tilly walked back into Martin's room. The mechanical hum of the ventilator loomed over everything, and Martin lay still, eyes closed, face pale. Tilly sniffed at his hand and let out a soft whine, then settled on the floor by the bed, curling into a tight ball. The dog's eyes stayed locked on Martin's motionless figure, as if refusing to let him slip away without a fight. Everyone wondered if Martin's final request, Simply to be with his beloved dog would end in heartbreak or in one more unexpected miracle. And as the hospital braced for another uncertain night, Tilly's unwavering gaze cast a silent message. She wasn't giving up. Not yet. And neither should they. Night deepened over Glenwood Community Hospital, and a quiet dread took hold of everyone who cared for Martin Spencer. The mechanical hiss of the ventilator echoed around his room, punctuating the heavy silence. Tilly lay curled by the side of his bed, one paw resting near Martin's motionless arm. Despite the heartbreak in her eyes, she refused to move. It was as if leaving him alone, even for a few minutes, might allow the darkness closing in to claim him for good. Jenna stood in the corridor watching through the doorway. The stark glow of fluorescent lights made the hospital halls feel otherworldly. Her shoulders sagged beneath the weight of helplessness. All the progress Martin had made seemed to vanish in a single afternoon. Even Tilly's miraculous calmness hadn't prevented this abrupt nosedive. Tears threatened to blur Jenna's vision, but she blinked them away, resolved to keep vigil. Dr. Alvarez had ordered additional tests, searching for a cause behind Martin's sudden crash. Nothing yet had provided any clear explanation, just the ravages of pneumonia and an unrelenting infection. Around midnight, Nurse Jill approached Jenna and offered a warm blanket. "Why don't you rest for a bit?" she suggested gently. "We'll page you if there's any change." Jenna shook her head, voice husky with fatigue. "I can't sleep knowing how close he might be to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Jill gave her hand a comforting squeeze but pressed no further. Everyone in the ward understood the dread of that final possibility, yet none of them wanted to speak the words aloud. Down the hall, 2 other nurses whispered about Tilly's unwavering presence. One recalled the time Tilly's alert had saved Martin when his monitors failed. The other mentioned that the dog had recently begun checking on pediatric patients more frequently, as though worried for them too. "She's got a gift," murmured one nurse. "Never seen anything like it." Her colleague nodded gravely, adding that if Tilly hadn't been there for Nora, the young girl's crisis might have turned fatal. Their voices carried the reverence people usually reserve for miracles. In the small hours of the morning, the hospital adopted an almost sacred hush. Fluorescent lights dimmed, and the scuff of rubber soles against linoleum became more pronounced in the emptiness. Tilly dozed fitfully. Each time Martin's breathing faltered, she'd jolt awake, ears pricked and eyes roving over the lines of tubes and wires that kept him alive. A nurse stepped in hourly to adjust the ventilator settings or check fluid levels, but there was little else anyone could do except wait and see if Martin's body would rally once more. Shortly after 3 o'clock, Jenna startled to the sound of a muffled bark. Tilly's voice, sharp but subdued, coming from within Martin's room. She rushed in to find the dog standing on her hind legs against the bed, leaning over Martin's torso as though trying to wake him. The monitors displayed no immediate crisis, but Tilly continued to bark, a sense of urgency in each small burst of sound. Heart-hammering, Jenna called a nurse. Within minutes, Dr. Alvarez arrived, rubbing sleep from her eyes, scanning Martin's vitals on the monitor. "Everything looks stable," Dr. Alvarez murmured, confusion etched on her features. "But Tilly's sense has been right before." She carefully examined Martin's chest with a stethoscope, then checked the IV lines. A nurse ran a quick test of the ventilator equipment. Nothing appeared amiss. At last, Tilly quieted, though she continued to stare at Martin with an intensity that left Jenna's nerves taut. Dr. Alvarez jotted notes in Martin's chart, remarking that Tilly might be noticing something too subtle for the machines to detect. They could only be vigilant. By dawn, Martin's heartbeat stuttered, sending the monitors into alarm. This time, the mechanical sensors picked it up instantly. A crash team rushed in, adrenaline fueling their every move. Tilly jumped back to avoid the sudden commotion, letting out frantic whines as Dr. Alvarez and her team attempted to stabilize Martin's erratic heart rhythm. Outside in the corridor, a handful of staff and the early morning cleaning crew paused mid-task, hearts pounding at the piercing beep of alarms. Jenna stood nearby, tears streaking her face, hands over her mouth as if in silent prayer. The flurry of medical intervention settled after several agonizing minutes, and the monitors steadied once more. Martin's body refused to let go, even as it teetered at the brink. Dr. Alvarez emerged, wiping a sheen of sweat from her forehead, her expression grim. "We got him back," she told Jenna quietly. "But I don't know how many more of these episodes he can handle. The infection is relentless." Jenna managed a shaky nod, hugging herself. Tilly carefully re-entered the room, ears low, tail tucked. She placed her front paws on the edge of Martin's bed and gently licked the back of his hand. For a split second, Martin's eyelids fluttered, then sank closed again. No one could say if he even registered the dog's presence, but Tilly poured her devotion into him regardless. An unexpected visitor arrived that morning, Ms. Veronica Lewis. She reappeared in the hospital hallway, looking markedly different from her earlier visits. Her hair was slightly tousled, her suit jacket wrinkled as though she'd driven through the night. Gone was the air of unshakable poise. She asked to speak privately with Dr. Alvarez, who, still bone-weary from the night's ordeal, led Ms. Lewis to a break room. The coffee pot gurgled quietly as Ms. Lewis sank into a plastic chair, shoulders slumped. "I heard about Mr. Spencer's relapse," Ms. Lewis began, her voice subdued. "I came to check on the situation. Redwood County monitors these developments." Dr. Alvarez suppressed an urge to snap at her, remembering the stress Ms. Lewis had caused. But the official's demeanor was far from combative now. "He's stable, but it's precarious," Dr. Alvarez answered curtly. "We're doing everything we can, including keeping Tilly close." To Dr. Alvarez's surprise, Ms. Lewis simply nodded, a flicker of sympathy crossing her features. "I've been thinking about my stance here, what happened with that child, Nora, and Tilly's role in her recovery. It made me question if we're sometimes too rigid." She cleared her throat, looking uncomfortable. "I requested more data from Redwood's mental health division, trying to see if there's a better way to incorporate animals in palliative care, especially in final requests." Dr. Alvarez studied Ms. Lewis's face, searching for insincerity but finding none. The exhaustion and worry behind the woman's eyes were genuine. Perhaps this was the closest thing to an apology she could muster. With a small nod, Dr. Alvarez decided to extend the olive branch. "We appreciate your willingness to reconsider. If Martin pulls through, we hope Redwood will broaden its guidelines. Tilly's proven her worth." Ms. Lewis let out a breath. "I'm not sure if Redwood can change everything overnight, but you have my support for Tilly to remain, whether it's one more day or a dozen. I'll push for an updated policy that accounts for these real-life exceptions." Her voice softened. I hope he makes it." Jenna spotted Ms. Lewis leaving the break room soon after, her posture weary but no longer bristling with the same hard-edged authority. If anything, the official's exit felt understated, as though she couldn't reconcile her role in enforcing rules with the raw humanity unfolding behind each hospital door. While few staff members witnessed her visit, word quickly spread that Ms. Lewis had not come to threaten Tilly's removal this time, but rather to gather insight into how the dog was helping. Later that day, Dr. Alvarez administered a more aggressive treatment regimen combining 2 potent antibiotics. "His system might be fragile, but if we don't attack this infection, we'll lose him anyway," she confided to Nurse Jill. Martin's sedation remained high to keep him from fighting the ventilator. Tilly hovered close, lying as near as she could without getting in the way of tubes and IV lines, When Jenna visited, the dog would gaze at her with an expression that seemed almost pleading, as if Tilly believed Jenna alone could fix all that was wrong. Jenna tried her best to hold it together, reading Martin passages from a worn-out ranch journal she found in his belongings, hoping he could hear. She described the smell of fresh hay, the memory of sunrise walks with Tilly, and the gentle cluck of chickens in the yard. Each recollection was a lifeline cast into the darkness, urging Martin to hold on to whatever spark remained. Meanwhile, the hospital brimmed with quiet anticipation. The local media returned to follow up on Martin's condition and Tilly's unusual involvement. They interviewed staff, collecting uplifting anecdotes about the dog's intuitive responses. A producer from a regional news channel asked if they could film Tilly in action, but Mr. Davison gently declined, wary of turning a medical crisis into a spectacle. Still, stories and rumors abounded. People claimed Tilly had a sixth sense, that she could detect changes in Martin's body no machine could register. That evening, Dr. Alvarez noticed a slight improvement in Martin's temperature. It dropped from a dangerous high to a more moderate fever, and his white blood cell count showed the barest hint of stabilization. Though tenuous, it was a reason to hope. She quickly shared the update with Jenna, who nearly collapsed with relief. Tilly poked her muzzle against Jenna's leg, as if reminding her they still needed to be cautious. Hour by hour, Martin's condition began to turn. His blood pressure steadied, and the raging infection that had threatened to overwhelm his lungs seemed to recede, inch by grueling inch. On the second night, Dr. Alvarez tried reducing the sedatives, allowing Martin to surface closer to consciousness. Tilly's posture grew more alert, as though expecting him to open his eyes any minute. Jenna sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tight. The ventilator continued its measured whoosh, an unsettling lullaby for them all. In the early dawn, Martin's eyelids fluttered. The nurse on duty leaned in, calling Dr. Alvarez over the intercom. Within moments, Jenna was by the bed, heart pounding. Martin's eyes opened to narrow slits. He stared at the ceiling, confusion knitting his brow. Then very slowly, he turned his head toward Tilly. The dog emitted a tiny whine of encouragement. Martin's lips parted, trying to form words, but only a faint rasp emerged, overshadowed by the tube down his throat. Dr. Alvarez moved carefully, checking vitals to see if removing the ventilator was feasible. "He's responding," she said to Jenna, voice taut with cautious excitement. "But we have to proceed slowly." Jenna reached for her father's hand, tears spilling. Martin's fingers twitched, acknowledging her presence. Tilly, tail sweeping the floor, inched closer to press her nose against Martin's other hand. For 2 more days, Martin lingered between sedation and partial awareness, an unpredictable dance of recovery. Each time his eyes flickered open, Tilly was there to greet him. By the end of that period, Dr. Alvarez announced her intention to wean Martin off the ventilator, provided his oxygen levels remained stable. It was a delicate procedure, one that required skilled respiratory therapists and the readiness to re-intubate if anything went wrong. Jenna felt her chest tighten, remembering how fragile Martin had been. When at last they removed the ventilator tube, Martin coughed violently, gasping. Nurses rushed in, adjusting the oxygen mask while Dr. Alvarez monitored the results. For a terrifying moment, the readouts dipped dangerously. Then Martin coughed again, exhaled harshly, and managed a shallow yet unmistakably self-sustained breath. Everyone around him held their own breath in collective tension, waiting to see if he could hold on. Martin's chest rose and fell, rose and fell. Relief flooded the room. A nurse discreetly wiped her eyes. Jenna mouthed a silent prayer of thanks. Martin's first act, once he'd caught his breath, was to croak out a single word. "Tilly." The sound of his voice, barely above a whisper, made Jenna choke back a sob. She guided Tilly closer, and the dog carefully stretched upward, placing her front paws on the edge of the bed. Martin lifted a trembling hand to rest on her head. "You stayed," he breathed, voice cracked with emotion. Tilly licked his fingers in reply, eyes shining with unconditional devotion. Dr. Alvarez, swallowing her own surge of emotion, stepped forward. "Mr. Spencer," she said softly, "you've been through quite a storm. Do you remember what happened?" Martin closed his eyes for a second, nodding weakly. Then he looked to Jenna, voice still raw. "Nora, she's all right?" Jenna smiled through tears. "She's fine, Dad. She went home days ago. You're the one who gave us a scare." A faint, fragile grin tugged at Martin's lips. "I'm not ready. Not yet," he whispered, turning to Tilly as if sharing the secret. And though the entire hospital had witnessed miracle after miracle in those halls, in that moment, it felt like the greatest wonder of all was hearing Martin's promise to continue living. Tilly nuzzled closer, and Martin's eyes shimmered with gratitude too profound for words. Martin's fragile smile was more than enough encouragement for the hospital staff to continue their tireless efforts at his side. Over the next several days, the ICU team found a delicate balance of medications to fight his infection while supporting his weakened lungs. A cautious sense of optimism settled in. Though Martin remained vulnerable, each small sign of progress felt like a step toward the light. Tilly never wavered, staying by his bed in quiet vigilance that captivated everyone who witnessed it. Jenna was amazed by how her father's eyes would track Tilly's movements whenever he managed to stay awake for more than a few minutes. Nurses noted that Tilly's mere presence seemed to stabilize Martin's vitals. Even something as simple as the dog resting her head on his forearm helped him remain calm and at ease. Whenever he slipped into restless sleep, Tilly would occasionally roam into the hall, checking on the same pediatric rooms where she'd once comforted Nora. The entire facility had embraced her as something akin to a guardian spirit. On a brisk morning, Dr. Alvarez gently informed Martin that he might be well enough to transfer out of the ICU soon. "We'll keep you on oxygen support," she said, offering him a glass of water. "But if your next set of lab results show continued improvement, we can move you to a quieter ward." Martin nodded, still short of breath. His voice rasped softly as he glanced toward Tilly curled beside the bed. "Wherever I go," he said, "she goes too." His devotion to Tilly matched hers to him. Dr. Alvarez simply smiled. She saw no reason after all that had happened to keep them apart. Jenna took advantage of her father's improving condition to run a few errands outside the hospital. She felt a pang of guilt stepping away, but Martin insisted. "Go home for a bit," he wheezed. "Check on the ranch. Make sure the fence hasn't collapsed. Tilly and I will be here waiting." Though she worried about leaving him even briefly, Jenna knew the ranch had been neglected, and Martin's neighbor, Mrs. Daly, could only handle so much. Beyond that, Jenna wanted to gather some familiar comforts, photos and personal items that might speed up Martin's healing by reminding him of home. Driving out to the Spencer Ranch triggered a wash of childhood memories. The winding dirt road framed by tall grasses, the white picket fence that stretched for half a mile, the old windmill that squeaked in high winds. Each detail reminded her of how seldom she'd visited in recent years. As she parked outside the modest house, she noticed that Tilly's usual spot on the porch was empty, replaced by a lonely chair. For a moment, she felt a stab of regret. All these years spent chasing promotions and city life, leaving Martin mostly alone with Tilly for company. Mrs. Daly stepped out from behind the barn, wiping her hands on worn gardening gloves. "Jenna, dear," she greeted, a wave of relief crossing her face. "I've tried to keep the place up, but your father's always been the one who handles the real work." Jenna felt tears prick the corners of her eyes as she replied, "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Daly. He's resting now, but getting better. I came to pick up a few things to brighten his hospital room." They walked together into the house, rummaging through old boxes of photos and the jackets Martin liked to wear on cold mornings. Jenna filled a small bag with items that carried her father's scent, something that might comfort Tilly as well. Before leaving, Jenna gazed around the silent living room, recalling all the times Martin had sat by the fireplace with Tilly at his feet. She found a frayed dog blanket folded in the corner and tucked it under her arm, then decided to gather a few older pictures of Martin and Tilly in their daily routines. In one snapshot, Tilly was just a pup standing on the porch steps, and Martin stood behind her with a proud grin. Another photo showed them in the field, Tilly bounding after a stray chicken while Martin laughed. Holding these images close to her heart, Jenna promised herself that once Martin recovered, she'd spend more time here, ensuring he was never again so isolated. When she returned to the hospital, the difference in Martin's demeanor was immediately apparent. He was sitting up slightly, still pale, but unmistakably better than before. Tilly perked up at Jenna's arrival, and the dog's tail thumped against the floor in a slow, joyful rhythm. Jenna placed the old blanket over Martin's lap, the smell of home drifting through the sterile hospital air, his eyes closed with gratitude. "Smells like the ranch," he murmured. "Thank you, kiddo." Over the following days, Martin was moved to a less intensive ward. Dr. Alvarez supervised the transfer personally, ensuring the staff there understood that Tilly was officially permitted to stay. Redwood County's policy remained strict, but Ms. Lewis had filed new paperwork classifying Tilly under a special therapeutic allowance. That status, combined with Teresa Huffman's provisional therapy dog certification, gave Tilly near unrestricted access to Martin's side. In the new ward, patients frequently passed by Martin's door, hoping for a glimpse of the now famous Border Collie mix. Nurses noticed how, even in a calmer environment, Tilly rarely let her guard down. She seemed determined to shepherd Martin through every hurdle until he could walk out on his own. One late afternoon, while Martin was dozing, Jenna spread out the photographs she'd brought from the ranch on a small tray table. She quietly told Tilly stories behind each picture. The dog sniffed them, ears pricking as if she recognized certain images. Jenna smiled wistfully. "You've been with him through everything, haven't you?" she whispered. Tilly's gaze flicked from the photos to Martin's sleeping form, then back again. Though a dog couldn't speak, Jenna swore she saw unwavering devotion in that expression, the same silent vow Tilly had upheld from the moment she came into Martin's life. Ms. Lewis made a surprise visit early one morning, though this time there was no tension in her footsteps. She carried a small folder stamped with Redwood County's logo. Approaching Jenna in the hallway, she admitted quietly, "I wanted to see how Mr. Spencer was doing and to bring this." Opening the folder, she revealed an official certificate designating Tilly as an accredited companion dog for end-of-life and rehabilitative support. Ms. Lewis cleared her throat. "We're calling it a pilot program. If all goes well, Redwood might expand these exemptions for future cases." She paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "I hope it helps." Jenna stared at the certificate, stunned by how quickly Redwood had pivoted from forcing Tilly out to championing her presence. "Thank you," Jenna said, voice trembling with relief. Ms. Lewis offered a faint nod, as though uncertain how to handle gratitude. They walked together toward Martin's room, where Tilly stood by the door. Ms. Lewis crouched, letting Tilly sniff her hand, a gesture unthinkable just a week earlier. The dog accepted her, giving a gentle wag. "Good girl," Ms. Lewis murmured under her breath. In that single moment, the tension of earlier battles seemed to dissolve. Martin's slow rehabilitation continued. Breathing treatments became more frequent, and though he remained fatigued, he showed small victories each day, standing with assistance, managing a short walk around the ward, and speaking in stronger tones. Tilly accompanied him on these brief strolls, never straying far. She seemed to sense Martin's unsteadiness and walked at his pace, offering silent support. A physical therapist named Carmen soon noticed Tilly's knack for boosting Martin's confidence. "I've never had a patient who relaxed so quickly just by having a dog near," Carmen remarked, guiding Martin through gentle stretching exercises. "It's like Tilly's presence halves his anxiety." During these sessions, the entire staff marveled at Tilly's attunement. If Martin's muscles trembled or he looked close to losing balance, Tilly would pause, forcing him to stop as well. If Carmen said, "Good job," or "You've got this," Tilly would wag her tail in unison, as though praising him too. Martin sometimes chuckled, calling Tilly his furry personal trainer. Even with the tubes and bandages, Martin's spirit sparkled in a way Jenna hadn't seen in years. Away from Martin's bedside, Tilly also took time to greet other patients. Perhaps spurred by curiosity, she'd slip through partially open doors in the new ward. One elderly woman recovering from surgery let out a joyful squeal when Tilly ambled in, tail waving politely. A teenage boy with a cast on his leg grinned, snapping selfies with the dog. And in each room, Tilly spread a warmth that was more than mere novelty. It was a gentle reminder that healing wasn't just about medical interventions. Compassion, acceptance, and hope all played a role. Local newspapers and TV stations continued to run stories about Tilly. They interviewed Dr. Alvarez, who spoke passionately about the emotional dimension of healthcare. They also caught glimpses of Ms. Lewis in the hallway, prompting quiet speculation. Some wondered if Redwood County might enact a permanent policy shift. Others marveled at how Ms. Lewis herself had softened. In a short clip broadcasted one evening, she acknowledged that extreme circumstances sometimes require exceptional measures, and praised the hospital staff for their dedication. Back in his room, Martin found himself reflecting on the path that led him to this moment. He told Jenna how lucky he felt to have a second chance, how the ranch would need some upkeep once he returned. She promised to handle it, confessing through tears that she wished she'd shown him that care all along. He squeezed her hand, voice low but earnest. "What matters is, we have the time now." Tilly lay at the foot of the bed, ears perked, as if understanding the conversation. In Martin's mind, she was just as responsible for that precious time as the doctors and nurses. As the final tests approached to determine if Martin could go home, Dr. Alvarez made one last thorough evaluation. His lungs, while scarred, were clearing of infection. His oxygen intake no longer relied on the highest flow machines, and his vital signs remained relatively strong. "We'll need outpatient support," Dr. Alvarez warned. "And you'll have to keep Tilly around full time," she teased. Martin's laugh rumbled. That was never in question. The day Martin was cleared for discharge, an air of celebration rippled through the ward. Nurses who had grown attached to Martin came to say their goodbyes. Nora and her parents even drove back to wish him luck, brandishing a hand-drawn welcome home poster featuring Tilly in bright colors. Ms. Lewis dropped by discreetly, offering a rare smile and a quick handshake, telling Martin she hoped Redwood could learn from his experience. When the moment finally arrived, Martin donned a light jacket, shakily rose from his hospital bed, and accepted a walker to help him navigate. Jenna hovered close, carrying a small box of his belongings. Tilly circled them in excited arcs, tail wagging so hard her entire backside seemed to sway. Half the staff gathered in the hallway, clapping and cheering as Martin, with Tilly's help, took those first tentative steps out of his room. His breathing was labored, but there was a glow in his eyes that no adversity could dim. "This place has given me more than my life back," Martin said in a voice thick with emotion. "It's shown me the kindness I never knew I needed, from doctors, nurses, and from you," he added, looking down at Tilly. The dog barked once, as if acknowledging the praise, then nudged Martin forward, as though urging him onward to the next chapter. Dr. Alvarez escorted them to the hospital entrance, assisting Martin into Jenna's car. She gave Tilly a fond pat. "Take good care of him," she whispered. The dog gave a soft lick to Dr. Alvarez's hand. Then, with careful movements, Martin settled in, Tilly climbing into the back seat and resting her chin on his shoulder. Jenna slid into the driver's seat, tears of both relief and anticipation glistening in her eyes. As the car pulled away from Glenwood Community Hospital, staff members waved and wiped away tears. Martin closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sun warm his face. His final request to be with his dog had led to a journey none of them had anticipated, a journey that saved not just Martin's life, but also reshaped hearts and policies along the way. Now, as Tilly's gentle breath fanned over his ear from the back seat, Martin felt the weight of gratitude settle over him. He had a home to return to, a daughter ready to stand by him, and a dog whose unwavering love had defied every obstacle. The wheels crunched softly over the gravel driveway as Jenna eased the car to a stop in front of the Spencer Ranch. Martin gazed through the windshield, his eyes misty. The house looked the same as always. The worn porch steps, the weathered paint on the shutters. Yet in his mind, everything felt different. Tilly pressed her face against the back window, tail stirring with excitement as she recognized familiar sights. A gentle wind swayed the tall grass around the fence line, carrying with it the distinct smell of pine and open fields. Jenna hurried around to help Martin out of the passenger seat, supporting him as he rose unsteadily. His legs trembled, partly from lingering weakness and partly from the powerful flood of homecoming emotions. Tilly hopped onto the driveway and circled them, letting out soft barks as if inviting them to hurry inside. The months of solitude here, broken only by Mrs. Daly's visits, must have weighed on Tilly's mind as much as it had on Martin's. "I'm all right," Martin insisted when Jenna tried to guide his every movement. Though he leaned on a walker for balance, he was determined to take his first steps back onto ranch soil on his own terms. Tilly stayed close, her eyes flicking between Martin's feet and his face, ready to steady him in spirit if he faltered. Slowly, they made their way up the porch steps that had once been so trivial to climb, each step a reminder of how fragile life could be. Mrs. Daly had left a home-cooked meal and a note in the kitchen, welcoming Martin back and promising to drop by later with fresh groceries. The sight of that simple gesture filled Jenna with gratitude. She recalled all the times her father had told neighbors not to fuss over him, how he preferred to handle life alone. Now she understood how vital such gestures were, especially when independence could slip away in the blink of an eye. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust and old wooden floors. Even so, Martin closed his eyes momentarily, inhaling as though it were a perfume more precious than anything else. Tilly trotted to her favorite spot near the fireplace, turned in a quick circle, and settled down with a contented sigh. Then, as if remembering her new duties, she rose again to check on Martin, who was easing himself onto the living room couch. Jenna fetched pillows from the back room, arranging them behind Martin so he could recline. "I've aired out your bedroom upstairs," she said softly, "but if you find the stairs too much, we can set up a bed here for a while." Martin waved a hand dismissively. "We'll see," he wheezed, though he offered her a faint smile to show his appreciation. Tilly hopped up beside the couch, sniffing the pillows before curling at Martin's feet, as if affirming that this was, indeed, where they both belonged. For the rest of that afternoon, Martin dozed on and off while Jenna tidied up. She caught herself humming as she moved through the familiar rooms, dusting shelves, straightening pictures, opening windows to invite fresh air. Every so often, Tilly would glance her way, as though checking to see if everything was in order. Even the dog seemed attuned to the shift in energy that accompanied Martin's return. Gone was the echoing loneliness that once filled the ranch house. In its place lingered a renewed sense of possibility. When Martin woke near dusk, he found Jenna perched on a nearby chair, sifting through letters and notices. "Most of these are medical bills and insurance statements," she explained with a wry smile. "But there's also a card from Nora's family." She handed it to Martin, who opened the envelope carefully. Inside, he found a collage of photos. Nora holding Tilly, Nora giving Martin a thumbs up from a hospital bed, and a handwritten message. "Thank you for reminding me that miracles can happen." Martin swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Tilly wandered over, sniffing the card with mild curiosity. "She likes you too, you know," Martin said, addressing the dog. "Though I get the feeling you were more her guardian angel than I was." Tilly's ears perked. Then she nuzzled Martin's hand gently. Jenna observed them with a smile. No matter how many times she saw it, the bond between her father and Tilly felt almost sacred. That evening, Jenna heated the meal Mrs. Daly had left, chicken soup and soft bread that smelled of rosemary. It was a far cry from hospital food, and Martin savored every spoonful. Tilly lingered expectantly, though Martin restricted her to gentle scraps, mindful that the dog's own health needed watching. Together they dined quietly, the clink of spoon against bowl, and Tilly's occasional crunch on a dog biscuit the only sounds breaking the hush of twilight. Later, Martin tried to climb the staircase to his bedroom. He made it halfway before his legs began shaking. Jenna rushed forward, but Tilly was faster, trotting up a few steps as if to block Martin from pushing himself too far. Amused despite his frustration, Martin sighed. All right, he muttered, letting Jenna help him back down. "I guess the couch will do for now." There was no anger in his voice, just acceptance. He'd learned the hard way that humility was sometimes a requirement for survival. Jenna fetched extra blankets and arranged them on the couch, while Tilly watched with approval from a nearby rug. That night, Martin struggled to fall asleep. Though his body was weak, his mind raced with memories of the hospital. The whir of machines seemed etched into his senses. At one point, he jolted awake, gasping for air as though expecting an alarm to go off or a nurse to rush in. But there was only quiet, broken by a soft whine from Tilly, who stepped closer and nudged his shoulder. Slowly, Martin's breathing eased. He stroked Tilly's fur, comforted by her steady presence until he drifted into a deeper, calmer sleep. By the next morning, Martin felt more at ease. He ate a modest breakfast of oatmeal, while Tilly lounged on the porch, soaking up the sun. A gentle knock at the door announced Mrs. Daly's arrival. She bustled in with fresh produce, fussing over Martin like an anxious hen. He endured her ministrations with a grateful grin, not daring to complain about her concern. Mrs. Daly ruffled Tilly's ears, praising the dog for her loyalty. "You're the talk of the whole county, you know," she said with a chuckle. "Folks can't get over how you pulled Martin back from the brink." Though Martin often brushed aside such praise, he couldn't deny the glow of pride he felt. Tilly was special, not just to him, but to so many others. As if on cue, Tilly thumped her tail at the mention of her name, then trotted outside, nose twitching. She must have picked up an interesting scent in the yard, perhaps a roaming rabbit or a stray cat. Martin didn't mind. He knew Tilly would be back soon. She always came back. Jenna spent her midday making phone calls, confirming Martin's upcoming medical appointments. Dr. Alvarez had insisted on weekly checkups for at least a month, along with physical therapy sessions in town. Ms. Lewis surprisingly sent a short email asking for updates on Martin's recovery and inviting him to speak at a Redwood County panel on therapy animals, if he ever felt up to it. Jenna read the email aloud, and Martin gave a quiet laugh. "Never thought I'd be asked to lecture people on hospital policy," he mused. "But if it helps Tilly open doors for others, maybe I'll do it." 2 days later, Carmen, the physical therapist who'd guided Martin's early rehab at the hospital, made a house call. She arrived armed with resistance bands, a portable pedal machine, and a bright smile. Tilly greeted her in the driveway with a polite wag, remembering Carmen's voice. "Nice to see you too," Carmen said, reaching down to pat Tilly. "Ready for your next lesson with Martin?" In the living room, Carmen helped Martin through leg stretches and guided him in gentle exercises to build stamina. Tilly laid close by, occasionally rising if Martin let out a sharp breath or grimace of discomfort. Each time, Carmen encouraged him with a "well done." Tilly would perk up her ears and wag as if echoing the praise. Eventually, Carmen gave a satisfied nod. "You're improving, Martin. Keep this up and you'll be navigating stairs again soon." That afternoon, the phone rang, and Jenna answered to find Nora on the other end. The young girl's voice was shy but excited as she asked how Martin was doing and whether Tilly was still as amazing as ever. Hearing the conversation, Martin motioned for Jenna to hand him the phone. He spoke in a tired but warm tone, thanking Nora for her concern and promising that someday, when they both felt up to it, she could visit the ranch. Tilly barked in the background, eliciting delighted laughter from Nora through the receiver. As the days turned into a week, Martin's routine became more manageable. In the mornings, he practiced short walks around the yard with the walker. Jenna followed behind, prepared to catch him if he stumbled, while Tilly loped beside them, alert to every move. After lunch, Martin rested in the living room, reading a bit or dozing. By dinner, he managed to help Jenna chop vegetables, determined to reclaim some semblance of independence. Through it all, Tilly acted as a calming anchor, her presence diffusing tension, her eager eyes reminding Martin to pace himself gently. Local acquaintances began stopping by more often, some out of curiosity, others out of genuine concern. They'd heard about Martin's near brush with death and wanted to see if the stories of Tilly's hospital heroics were true. Martin retold the tale sparingly, crediting the medical staff far more than himself, but everyone seemed to understand that Tilly was indeed the spark that kept him fighting. A few neighbors brought homemade quilts or pies, and Tilly always greeted them with polite acceptance, as though she knew they came bearing tokens of goodwill. In the midst of this renewed social bustle, Jenna realized how drastically her relationship with her father had shifted. Where once she'd felt distant, unsure how to breach his self-sufficient shell, now they openly shared relief, laughter, and regrets. Tilly, forever at their side, had smoothed the rough edges of communication that neither had known how to navigate alone. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the distant hills, Jenna hesitated before speaking. "Dad," she began, "I'm sorry for being away so long. I should have found a way to be here for you earlier." Martin sighed, expression contemplative. "We can't change the past," he replied, "and maybe I needed that space too, but I'm glad you came when you did." He looked at Tilly, who was dozing with her head on Jenna's foot. "You both saved me in your own ways." Jenna reached for Martin's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Words felt inadequate to express her gratitude that he was still alive, still forging ahead with her at his side. Days passed with a soft, steady rhythm, and Martin continued to improve. At the end of the second week home, he managed the full flight of stairs for the first time, Tilly trotting behind him as Jenna hovered anxiously below. The moment he stepped onto the second-floor landing, Martin let out a triumphant breath, grinning at Tilly. She barked once in approval. In that small victory, it felt as though the entire weight of his ordeal had lessened. Martin's mind drifted off into Redwood County's invitation. The idea of addressing a panel about therapy animals both intrigued and intimidated him. He wasn't a public speaker, but whenever he looked into Tilly's steady gaze, he remembered the countless patients at the hospital who had found comfort in her presence. If sharing his own experiences might help more animals like Tilly reach those who needed them, maybe it was worth stepping outside his comfort zone. "I'll think about it," he told Jenna one afternoon. "At least write down a few words, I'd say." Couldn't hurt. The evening before Martin's next hospital checkup, the phone rang again. Dr. Alvarez's voice crackled through the line, sounding more relaxed than Jenna had ever heard. "Your test results look remarkably good, Martin," she reported. "Your lungs are healing well and your overall labs are solid. I'd still like to see you tomorrow for a final assessment, but I'm impressed with the progress." Martin smiled, relief coursing through him. "We'll be there," he replied, adding after a small pause, "and Tilly will come too." Tomorrow would mark the first time Martin returned to Glenwood Community Hospital since his discharge, this time standing on his own 2 feet. The night air glowed silver outside, bathing the ranch in moonlight. Tilly settled at Martin's feet while he sat on the porch with a cup of tea, Jenna nearby, both soaking in the quiet. "I'm ready," Martin murmured, sipping slowly. "Ready to thank all those people who fought for me and ready to see the place where Tilly and I, well, where everything almost ended but also began again." Tilly lifted her head, ears angled at Martin's gentle voice. He chuckled, reaching down to scratch behind her ears. "Tomorrow we show them how far we've come, huh, girl?" She nudged his leg in response. Despite the hush, there was a sense of anticipation in the air, as though the entire ranch was preparing for the next chapter. And with Tilly's unwavering devotion leading the way, neither Martin nor Jenna had any doubt they would face it together. Morning light painted the Spencer Ranch in a soft gold glow as Martin and Jenna prepared for their trip back to Glenwood Community Hospital. Tilly seemed to sense the occasion, trotting from room to room, tail flashing in contented arcs. Martin, dressed in a comfortable flannel and jeans, paused by the mirror in the living room. He noted the remaining pallor of his cheeks, the slight slump in his shoulders, but overall he looked far steadier than the man who had been wheeled out of the hospital weeks ago. "You sure you're up for this, Dad?" Jenna asked, gathering her car keys and medical papers. "We can postpone if it's too much." Despite her casual tone, concern tightened her voice. Martin drew a slow breath, turning away from the mirror. "I'm ready. Anyway, I owe them a thank you. Without Dr. Alvarez and all those nurses and Tilly, I wouldn't be standing here." Tilly, perched by the door, let out a small bark as if echoing his statement. The drive into town was peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the car's windows, illuminating swirling dust motes. Tilly sat in the back seat, occasionally poking her muzzle forward between Jenna and Martin. A country music station played softly on the radio, its twangy chords blending with the light thump of tires on asphalt. They passed farmland and rolling hills, each swath of green dotted by grazing cattle. Martin exhaled a quiet sigh, cherishing the sight of open fields that reminded him how close he'd come to losing all of it. When the hospital's brick building rose into view, Martin tensed, memories of ventilators and hushed corridors rushing back. Jenna placed a comforting hand on his arm as she pulled into the parking lot. Tilly pressed her snout against the window. "Just for a quick checkup," Jenna reassured. "Nothing scary." In the lobby, they encountered more than a few surprised smiles. A volunteer manning the welcome desk exclaimed, "Look who it is, our walking miracle," and gave Tilly a gentle pat on the head. Martin tried to wave off the fuss, but he couldn't hide the flush in his cheeks. He leaned on his walker, quietly pleased that he was entering under his own power rather than in a wheelchair. Tilly matched his pace, ears perked in friendly greeting to everyone who approached. Dr. Alvarez awaited them near the central corridor, wearing her usual white coat and a pleased expression. "Martin, Jenna, and Tilly, our superstar." She crouched to give Tilly a warm greeting, then rose to inspect Martin with a clinician's eye. "You look better than I dared hope. Let's do a thorough exam and go over your labs, then maybe we'll celebrate with coffee in the lounge." Martin nodded, feeling a small surge of nerves. Despite everything, he wasn't entirely sure what the tests would reveal. Dr. Alvarez led them to a consultation room where a nurse drew blood, checked blood pressure, and recorded Martin's weight. Tilly settled near his feet, watching every procedure with quiet calm, as if monitoring the nurse's technique. "You have a certified quality inspector here," the nurse joked, feeling Tilly's gaze. Soon after, Dr. Alvarez performed a simple respiratory exam, guiding Martin through deep breathing exercises and carefully auscultating his lungs with a stethoscope. "Some lingering crackles," she said, meeting Martin's gaze, "but miles better than before." A scan of his medical chart followed, accompanied by nods of approval and occasional scribbles on her notepad. "White blood cell counts are normalizing, and chest X-ray improvements are remarkable." Jenna exhaled relief so profound that she almost teared up. Martin gave Tilly a discreet pat, as though thanking her for moral support during the stethoscope's cold press. Dr. Alvarez finally closed the file with a satisfied flourish. "I'll want you to keep up with physical therapy, and we'll continue to watch your lung capacity over the next month, but there's no indication you need readmission. You're on the right track." The three of them, Martin, Jenna, and Tilly, made their way to the small staff lounge at Dr. Alvarez's invitation. A few off-duty nurses gathered there, brightening upon seeing their former patient upright. Martin flushed at each exclamation of delight while Tilly politely accepted pats on the head and offers of dog treats. Over styrofoam cups of hospital coffee, conversation turned to Ms. Lewis's request for Martin to speak at a Redwood County panel about therapy animals. Dr. Alvarez's eyes lit up. "That's an excellent idea. You should share Tilly's story. It might spur change in other facilities." Martin shifted uncomfortably, shoulders tight. "I'm not much of a public speaker," he admitted. "Plus, Tilly's the real hero. I just showed up." Jenna caught her father's gaze. "Dad, people need to hear it from someone who's lived it. How many patients or families might benefit if Redwood County expands their guidelines because of you and Tilly?" A thoughtful hush followed, broken only by Tilly's quiet snuffle as she licked an offered dog treat. Dr. Alvarez gently squeezed Martin's hand. "Think about it," she said. "No pressure, but I believe your perspective is invaluable." Eventually, they made their way down the corridor to greet some of the nurses and patients still eager to see Tilly. Word spread quickly, and soon they were stopping by different rooms, each occupant hoping for just a moment with the dog whose name had become legend in these halls. Tilly's warmth seemed to melt away the usual distance between strangers. Her gentle tail wags and calm demeanor coaxed smiles even from those in pain. They ended up at the pediatric wing, where one young patient, a girl with bandages on her arm, lit up at the sight of Tilly. Martin watched, heart swelling as Tilly ambled closer and let the girl pet her. The sparkle in the child's eyes reminded him so starkly of Nora that his throat constricted. He'd survived his ordeal, and he needed to do something more than just heal. Perhaps Dr. Alvarez was right. Sharing his story might help others. Before leaving, Martin asked Jenna to swing by the main administrative office so he could speak to Mr. Davison, the hospital director who had fought for Tilly's right to stay. They found him reviewing paperwork at a cluttered desk, and he rose with a grin, greeting them. "Martin Spencer," Mr. Davison said, shaking Martin's hand. "It's good to see you on your feet, and Tilly, still doing what she does best, I see." They chatted about Martin's recovery and Redwood's pilot program. Then Martin cleared his throat, voice hesitant. "I was wondering if there's anything this hospital still needs that Tilly or I could help with. I'm not wealthy, but I've got a ranch, time, and willingness. And Tilly, she seems to have a special gift." Mr. Davison's eyebrows rose. "We've been discussing a therapy program, possibly bringing Tilly in on a regular schedule. But Redwood's rules are still evolving. It's tricky." Jenna stepped in, heart pounding with excitement. What if Tilly were officially part of a volunteer therapy program, even if just a few hours a week? "Dad's right. Her presence is powerful. We saw it firsthand." Mr. Davison stroked his chin, an intrigued smile forming. We do have a volunteer coordinator. Maybe we can set up a trial run. Tilly's proven her temperament, and if Redwood is leaning toward broader acceptance. Martin glanced down at Tilly, who stared back with trusting eyes. We'd be honored, he said simply. That settled. They said their goodbyes and headed outside, the sun high overhead. Martin paused on the hospital steps, turning around for one last look. He'd left this place in a vulnerable state, but also with a renewed sense of hope. Now, returning as a stronger man, he realized that both he and Tilly had left a piece of themselves within these walls, a piece that had touched and been touched by countless lives. During the ride home, Jenna ventured to ask Martin if he'd made a decision about the Redwood panel. He drummed his fingers on his knee, gazing out the window. It terrifies me, he admitted finally, but Tilly saved my life and she's saved others too. If our story can help push Redwood's guidelines in the right direction, then I can stomach a microphone or two. A trace of a smile tugged at his lips. Jenna felt relieved, though part of her worried about her father's stamina and the emotional toll such public speaking might exact. We'll go at your pace, she assured him. Promise. Tilly barked softly from the back seat, as though consenting to that plan. Once they returned to the ranch, the day slipped into a gentle rhythm of chores. Martin insisted on walking outside to greet his chickens, leaning on the fence while Tilly trotted through the yard, sniffing at tall grass. It astounded Jenna how normal the ranch felt now, compared to the tense emptiness she'd sensed before. The sun's rays angled over the fields, and the wooden boards of the house gleamed with that old, comforting familiarity. Later, Martin settled into his well-worn rocking chair on the porch, Tilly lying at his feet. Jenna joined them, setting out 2 glasses of iced tea on a small side table. Remember that talk you used to give me, Jenna said, about how a ranch demands heart and soul, not just money or time? Martin nodded, a reminiscent glow in his eyes. Well, Jenna continued, I think I finally get it. Being here isn't just about chores. It's about being part of something that grows, something that needs tending and gives back in its own way. Martin gazed toward the fields. I spent so many years thinking this ranch was just my duty after your mother passed, but Tilly taught me different. Maybe it's our sanctuary, not just an obligation. He reached down to ruffle Tilly's fur. She gave a soft huff of contentment. As dusk fell, Mrs. Daly arrived with a fresh casserole, making good on her habit of feeding Martin until he was strong enough to run laps. Her laughter was infectious, filling the porch with warmth. Tilly supervised from a short distance, as if approving the transfer of casserole from Mrs. Daly's hands to the kitchen table. Jenna smiled as she realized how many small acts of kindness had formed a safety net around Martin, neighbors, doctors, and, of course, Tilly herself. Before bed, Martin and Jenna found themselves again sitting on the porch swing, Tilly comfortably wedged between them. Crickets chirped a lullaby into the warm evening air. Martin closed his eyes for a moment, soaking in the peacefulness. It felt like an eternity since he'd been surrounded by the night chorus of the ranch. With a soft sigh, he turned to Jenna. You know, for a man who hated fuss, I sure have become the center of attention lately. She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. Well, Dad, you almost died. That kind of changes the rules on how much fuss you get. Tilly nudged Martin's knee, as though reminding him that she too had fussed over him in her own canine way. Martin patted her head gently. Thank you, girl, he whispered, voice thick with sentiment. My stubbornness might have carried me far, but you showed me that letting someone else care for you is its own kind of strength. A breeze rustled the nearby trees, carrying the subtle scent of hay. Martin breathed in slowly, no rasp of congestion or pain constricting his lungs. For the first time in months, he felt a semblance of wholeness, not just in body but in spirit. Tilly let out a soft huff and laid her head on his lap, content in this shared moment. Then, as if the night sky had been listening to their every thought, a shooting star arced across the horizon. Jenna spotted it first, gasping in delight. Martin caught a glimpse of its silvery trail. He smiled, tightening his arm around Jenna's shoulders. Tilly, not understanding the human custom of wishing on stars, simply glanced upwards, nose twitching. But Martin made a wish all the same, silent and profound, woven with gratitude and hope for the future. The following week, Martin made his decision about Redwood County's invitation. One evening, as he and Jenna sat at the kitchen table reviewing the mail, he cleared his throat and stated plainly, "I'll do it." There was no dramatic announcement, just the quiet certainty that had become part of his new outlook. Jenna set aside the stack of bills, her eyes sparking with encouragement. "That's wonderful," she said. "I'll let Ms. Lewis know we'll be there." Preparations began at once. The panel would take place in Redwood's newly renovated community center, a building that often hosted city council meetings and public forums. Ms. Lewis called Martin personally, sounding both professional and oddly grateful, giving details about the schedule. "We'll have you speak for about 10 minutes, she explained. "Then we'll open the floor to questions. Tilly is, of course, welcome." Martin heard the subdued excitement in her voice. Though they had clashed at the hospital, their shared experience with Tilly had altered their relationship profoundly. In the days leading up to the event, Martin practiced his remarks while pacing around the living room, leaning on his walker for balance. Jenna offered gentle feedback, reminding him to take it slow, to pause when he felt breathless. Sometimes, Tilly watched from the couch, tilting her head as Martin tried different phrasings. "You think I'm talking too much about my personal story?" Martin asked the dog one afternoon, drumming his fingers on his walker's handle. Tilly responded by hopping down and nosing Martin's free hand, as if reassuring him that people needed to hear every detail. He laughed quietly, conceding that Tilly was right. At night, as Martin reflected on everything that had happened, his close brush with death, the outpouring of community support, Redwood's reversal on their strict policy, he felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Gratitude interwove with lingering disbelief that his life had veered so dramatically. With Tilly dozing at the foot of the couch, Martin would sometimes wake from fitful dreams where he was still in the hospital, gasping for air, until Tilly's steady breathing lulled him back into calm. Each morning, he rose to discover the ranch's sunlit fields waiting, a reminder that those nights of terror had passed. Finally, the day of the panel arrived. Jenna insisted on driving. Martin wore a crisp shirt and slacks, feeling strangely like he did years ago when he attended local town meetings. Tilly rode in the back seat, occasionally whining in anticipation, as though she sensed the significance of the event. The drive to Redwood was just over an hour, taking them through rolling hills and past farmland. Part of Martin relished the open vistas, while another part of him felt a growing knot of nerves. They reached the community center early. A tall, modern-looking building with sleek glass doors, it stood in stark contrast to the older, rustic architecture in the surrounding town. Jenna parked in a side lot, helping Martin gather his notes. Tilly hopped out, sniffing the air, tail wagging at the faint smell of grilled hot dogs from a nearby park. Martin took a moment to steady himself. "Let's do this," he muttered, mustering a determined breath. Inside, the lobby buzzed with subdued excitement. Staff members wearing name badges guided them to a small backstage area where a few other speakers mingled. Most were medical professionals or hospital administrators eager to discuss proposed updates to Redwood County's therapy animal guidelines. They cast curious glances at Tilly, and one gentleman leaning on a cane came forward to greet Martin. "I'm Dr. Shu," he said, voice resonant. "I've heard so much about Tilly. It's an honor to meet the dog that's making all of us rethink how we approach patient care. Martin nodded politely, absorbing the man's warmth. Tilly sniffed Dr. Sue's hand, apparently granting approval. A hush fell when Ms. Lewis entered, wearing her usual professional attire. However, her demeanor was noticeably softer. She approached Martin with a small smile, offering to lead him and Tilly to their seats near the stage. "Thank you for agreeing to speak," she said, her voice earnest. "After everything that happened, it feels right to have your input." The event space was modest, with rows of chairs and a simple raised platform at the front. A Redwood County banner hung from the ceiling, and a projector screen stood to one side, presumably for slides. People began trickling in, some in business suits, others in casual clothes, a few wearing hospital scrubs. Martin saw Dr. Alvarez slip into a seat near the back, meeting his eyes with an encouraging nod. He had no idea she would attend, but her presence instantly bolstered his resolve. Jenna sat beside her father, Tilly at Martin's feet, while Ms. Lewis went to a small podium to open the session. "Good morning," Ms. Lewis began, scanning the gathering. "I'm Veronica Lewis, Director of Compliance at Redwood County Health Administration. We've convened this panel to discuss therapy animal policies and how we can better serve our patients and communities." She cleared her throat, glancing at Martin. "We have a special guest today, someone whose personal experience has shaped the evolution of our guidelines. Martin Spencer is here with Tilly, the dog who changed how we view compassionate care." Warm applause sprinkled across the room. Martin stood, leaning on his walker. Jenna offered an arm, but he gently shook his head. The short walk to the podium felt both monumental and surreal. Tilly, as if sensing the need for moral support, walked just behind him. Martin positioned himself next to the microphone, heart hammering against his rib cage. "Hello," he began, voice rasping. He took a small breath. "I'm Martin Spencer, and this here—" He patted Tilly's head. "Is Tilly, my best friend. A few months ago, I was lying in a hospital bed. Pneumonia nearly took my life." His words came halting at first, but he found his rhythm in the sincerity of his story. "I'd asked, as my final wish, to be with my dog. At the time, Redwood County policies made it almost impossible for Tilly to stay, but she was allowed by the grace of some compassionate people." He paused, scanning the audience. "She not only helped me recover, she helped other patients too. A little girl named Nora had a crisis, and Tilly's presence gave the doctors the time they needed to save her. The staff realized Tilly was more than a pet. She was part of the healing process." He glanced at Ms. Lewis, who returned a thoughtful nod. "I understand the need for guidelines. We want safety and cleanliness in hospitals, but I also believe there's a greater responsibility to honor the relationships that can genuinely save lives." Dr. Alvarez smiled from the back row, and Martin drew confidence from that. "So, if Redwood County asked for my perspective, here it is. Therapy animals belong in healthcare settings, done correctly. Vaccinations, hygiene, temperament checks. They can offer what medicine alone can't: compassion, comfort, hope." Martin's voice wavered, and he cleared his throat again. "I'm no policy expert, but I am living proof that one dog can make all the difference." Applause broke out, more robust this time. Martin exhaled, heat rushing to his face. Tilly leaned against his leg, tail sweeping the stage floor. Ms. Lewis stepped up discreetly to guide Martin to a chair. When he sat, Dr. Sue approached the podium and launched into a polished presentation about the scientific benefits of therapy animals, reduced stress hormones, improved patient morale, even potential boosts in immune function. His slides showed graphs, but every so often, the crowd shifted their attention to Tilly resting contentedly near Martin. She was the embodiment of those graphs and stats, the living example that validated them all. A short panel discussion followed, Several administrators asked questions about implementing therapy dog programs, where to house the animals, how to ensure liability coverage, how to integrate them seamlessly without interfering with medical protocols. Dr. Alvarez stepped forward to share her experiences, praising Redwood's steps toward compassion-based exemptions. One official from a neighboring county suggested a pilot project to train more dogs like Tilly, recruiting volunteers who might replicate the success Glenwood Community Hospital had seen. The energy in the room buzzed with possibility. At the session's end, Ms. Lewis took the microphone again, thanking everyone for their insights. She ended by saying, "We still have to finalize Redwood's updated policy, but after hearing these stories, I can promise we're moving forward with a more flexible approach. We want to ensure that what happened with Martin and Tilly doesn't remain an exception. It becomes an example." Sustained applause filled the space. Martin sat, hands trembling slightly on his walker's handle, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just transpired. Tilly nuzzled his knee and he leaned down to scratch her ears. He didn't have the words to describe how grateful he was. How, in a matter of months, they had gone from fighting for Tilly to remain by his hospital bed, to shaping policies that could help countless others. As the meeting broke up, multiple attendees approached Martin. Some asked for details, while others simply expressed thanks. A woman confided that her father had died alone in a hospital because they weren't allowed to bring his beloved cat. "I wish I'd known about these exemptions," she said tearfully. "Maybe he would have gone more peacefully." Martin pressed her hand, gently encouraging her to share that story with Redwood's staff. Real change, he realized, emerged from many voices telling the truth of their experiences. Jenna, beaming, squeezed Martin's shoulder. "You did wonderfully. I'm so proud of you." He smiled, the tension in his chest finally easing. Together they navigated toward the lobby, Tilly trotting between them, tail still wagging. Dr. Alvarez found them by the glass doors, offering a hug to Martin and kneeling to pat Tilly once more. "You've given all of us in the medical field a reminder of why we do this job," she told Martin. "Sometimes we get lost in bureaucracy, but your story lit a path back to compassion." Ms. Lewis approached again, looking somewhat hesitant. "Martin, I just wanted to say," she glanced at Tilly. "Back at the hospital, I was so focused on rules that I forgot why those rules exist, to protect and serve people. Seeing Tilly at work changed that. I hope you'll keep in touch if Redwood can help your ranch become a place for therapy training or something similar." Martin nodded, pondering the possibility. Maybe he could open a small portion of his land for a therapy animal program. It was an intriguing idea that warmed his heart. Before stepping outside, Martin stopped to let Tilly sniff a large potted plant near the entrance. The dog's curiosity about the leafy decor made him chuckle, a small reflection of how life could be so simple and pure, even in the midst of big changes. From behind them, someone called Martin's name. He turned to see a reporter, microphone in hand, edging closer. "Could we have a quick statement?" she asked. "We want to highlight your role here." Martin glanced at Tilly, then back at the reporter. "I don't have much more to say," he replied quietly. "Just that I'm grateful for the second chance I got and for the hope Tilly brings to others. If sharing my experience means more patients get to be with the animals they love, that's all I could ask for." Tilly barked once as if punctuating his final statement. The reporter smiled, lowering her microphone. Fresh air and sunshine greeted them as they exited the community center. The sky shimmered with mid-afternoon light, and Martin inhaled a long, careful breath. He glanced over at Jenna, then down at Tilly. "All right," he said, setting the walker aside briefly to stand on his own. "Time we head home. I have a ranch that's been waiting, and Tilly's got some well-deserved rest ahead." Even so, as they made their way to the car, Martin couldn't help but dwell on the future. one in which Tilly's story, and his own, continued to ripple outward, touching more lives than he ever thought possible. Martin and Jenna arrived home from the Redwood panel, feeling an exhilaration that neither of them had anticipated. Tilly, meanwhile, stretched out contentedly in the back seat, nose lifted to the open window. The sweet country air brought the promise of simple routines and quiet evenings on the ranch, an appealing contrast to the bustling event they had just left behind. Soon after pulling into the driveway, Martin leaned his walker against the porch rail and took a moment to observe his surroundings. The fields were tinted with the warm hues of late afternoon, and a slight breeze ruffled Tilly's fur. Jenna noted the calm on her father's face. "Well," she said with a grin, "I guess you've officially become a public speaker, Dad." He chuckled in spite of himself. "Don't go planning any tours. But yes, it felt right to share what Tilly did for me and for others." Tilly bounded up the porch steps to her favorite spot near the door, wagging as if to say she was glad to be home. Martin patted her back, murmuring, "We did it, girl." Inside, Martin sank into the couch, exhausted but satisfied. His breath still grew uneven after periods of strain, and that morning's drive plus the emotional weight of the panel had taken its toll. Jenna prepared a simple supper, scrambled eggs and toast, while Tilly lounged at Martin's feet, eyes half closed. Over their quiet meal, father and daughter chatted about the wide range of people they'd encountered: hospital administrators wanting to replicate Tilly's success, families with heartfelt stories of how much a pet had meant in dire circumstances, and seasoned doctors who were re-evaluating how to approach patient care. "It's amazing," Jenna mused, handing Martin a plate. A few months ago, Redwood officials nearly forced Tilly out. Now they're talking about pilot programs that might change health policies for the entire region. She reached down to scratch Tilly's chin. "You're changing the world one wag at a time, aren't you?" Martin ate slowly, each bite a reminder that his strength was still on the mend, but he managed a soft laugh. "I just hope Redwood follows through. Bureaucracy can be slow as molasses. Still, I never would have believed so many people would listen to my story." He glanced toward Tilly. "Though we all know she's the main reason." Darkness settled over the ranch. Martin and Jenna decided to spend some time on the porch, watching the stars blink awake. Tilly circled around the small yard, investigating every rustle in the grass. Martin sipped water, leaning back in the old rocking chair, reflecting on the day's events. "I kept thinking about Nora," he said quietly. "She's the reason I realized Tilly's influence went beyond me alone. That little girl could have lost her life without Tilly alerting the staff in time." Jenna nodded. "It's humbling, isn't it? We have all this technology, yet sometimes it's the simplest form of compassion that makes the biggest difference." She gazed at Tilly, who was now sniffing near the fence line. "I wonder if we can train other dogs like her." The next morning, Martin rose earlier than usual. Sleep had come in fits, but a sense of anticipation fueled him. He found Tilly waiting at the porch door, tail beating a friendly rhythm. "Morning, girl," he greeted, letting her out to roam the yard while he carefully navigated the steps with his walker. The air carried a crisp edge, a reminder that autumn would soon make its presence known. After breakfast, Martin decided to check on his chickens for the first time in weeks. Though Mrs. Daly had overseen their care, Martin missed the routine. Jenna accompanied him, Tilly following close behind. Approaching the coop, they heard soft clucking, a reassuring sign of normalcy. The chickens fluttered around, pecking contentedly. Tilly observed from a respectful distance, tail swishing in lazy interest. Martin, leaning on the fence, managed a small chuckle. "They're as feisty as ever," he remarked, relieved by the everyday continuity of farm life. That afternoon, a knock at the front door announced a visitor. Carmen, the physical therapist, had driven out for a home session. She greeted Martin with a warm smile, swiftly noting that he stood a bit straighter than before. Tilly padded over to greet her, clearly remembering their sessions in the hospital. "I see you've kept up the exercises," Carmen said, setting her bag down. "How about we do some gentle walking drills around the porch and yard just to gauge your progress?" Martin obliged, and Tilly escorted him step by step as Carmen provided pointers. Whenever Martin stumbled or tensed, Tilly paused, looking back with what seemed like concern. Carmen studied that dynamic with fascination. "You know," she observed, "Tilly is doing a sort of intuitive therapy. She reads your cues and adapts without formal training. Imagine if we harnessed that." Jenna, standing nearby, folded her arms thoughtfully. "Dad, do you remember Redwood's mention of a therapy dog training project? Carmen might be exactly the kind of professional we'd need. If we set up something here on the ranch, Tilly could be a guide for other dogs." Martin exchanged a glance with Tilly, who offered a single tail thump as if waiting for his response. Carmen's eyes lit with enthusiasm. "I'd volunteer time for that, helping shape a program, evaluating dogs' temperaments, teaching handlers how to work in a medical environment. If Redwood agrees to sponsor it, we could do a pilot program right here." Martin felt a flicker of apprehension. He'd always valued his privacy, and the ranch was his sanctuary. But Tilly's impact convinced him that some sanctuaries might be shared. "Maybe we can talk to Ms. Lewis," he ventured. "See if Redwood would support a small training center. Nothing huge, just a place to show others how a bond like ours can be fostered." Jenna's face lit up, brimming with excitement at the idea. "I'll make some calls, set up a meeting. Dad, you might be starting another new chapter." In the days that followed, Martin felt a stirring of purpose. Instead of merely focusing on regaining his own strength, he considered how the ranch could host small workshops. Carmen and Jenna collaborated on a short proposal, outlining how dogs and their owners could train under Tilly's gentle influence and Martin's lived expertise. The plan included mock hospital environments in Martin's barn, careful socialization exercises, and visits from medical staff who could guide protocol. Ms. Lewis and Dr. Alvarez, upon hearing the idea, responded with cautious optimism. Redwood County might grant modest funding, especially if Martin's story continued garnering public support. Tilly was already recognized as a certified therapy dog, which provided a crucial legal framework. Meanwhile, local volunteers expressed interest. A retired veterinarian from a nearby town offered to conduct health checks on any enrolled dogs, ensuring they met medical standards. Word spread in Glenwood about Martin's ranch possibly becoming a bridge between farmland and hospital healing, as one neighbor put it. Mrs. Daly embraced the concept eagerly, volunteering to handle extra chores. Some neighbors, though, seemed astonished that Martin, long known for his stubborn independence, was now welcoming others so freely onto his land. Martin shrugged off their surprise. "I guess I changed," he would say, glancing down at Tilly's faithful gaze. "It happens." During this flurry of activity, Martin found himself fighting waves of fatigue. His improvement was real but far from complete. Some nights, restless coughing kept him awake and old fears would resurface like ghosts. Tilly was ever watchful, sometimes waking him with a gentle nudge if his breathing turned ragged. He told Jenna he felt safer having the dog nearby, as though Tilly could sense an oncoming crisis before it fully hit. In truth, her presence softened the shadows that lingered in his mind. One afternoon, Nora's family visited the ranch. True to Martin's promise back in the hospital, the young girl arrived with a bright smile, her arm now free of bandages. She giggled at the sight of Tilly racing across the yard to meet her. "You look so happy, Mr. Spencer," Nora exclaimed, eyes shining, "and Tilly still remembers me." Indeed, the dog bounded around Nora, tail wagging in joyous circles. The girl knelt to hug Tilly, whispering thanks into her fur for saving her life. Watching them, Martin felt a lump in his throat. How easily Tilly bridged connections, forging a sense of community that words alone could not achieve. Nora's parents were similarly moved, thanking Martin for letting their daughter see the place where Tilly came from. "It means a lot," Nora's mother said softly, placing a hand on Martin's arm. "Sometimes she wakes from nightmares, but remembering Tilly helps calm her." Martin nodded, that old weight of sorrow and gratitude mingling in his chest. If Tilly's presence could spare someone else the anguish he had felt, then all the effort was worthwhile. Plans for the pilot program advanced quickly. Redwood authorized a modest grant, and Ms. Lewis, in a shift that still amazed those who recalled her earlier stance, helped expedite permits. Carmen scheduled an initial training session for a handful of local dog owners who believed their pets had the right temperament for therapy work. Dr. Alvarez volunteered to lead a short seminar on infection control and patient safety. Martin couldn't believe how many people were lining up behind an initiative sparked by Tilly's unwavering loyalty. As the first workshop date approached, Martin worried about practical details. Would the barn suffice as a training space? Could the ranch handle that many visitors without disrupting its daily rhythms? Jenna assured him they would keep the group small and manageable, ensuring Tilly wouldn't become overwhelmed. "We can start slow," she said, flipping through notes on a clipboard. "Just a few families, a couple of local clinicians, and Carmen overseeing the exercises." That evening, Martin and Tilly strolled around the property to decompress. The sun's last rays shimmered over the fields, and the sky blazed with pink and orange hues. Tilly sniffed at the perimeter fence, occasionally pausing to see if Martin was still behind her. He took his time, leaning on the walker but feeling stronger each day. In the hush of sunset, Martin's thoughts drifted to the hospital bed, the beep of monitors, the cold fear of not getting a final moment with his dog. Now that chapter seemed distant, though he would never forget the lessons it imparted. At the top of a gentle slope near the barn, Martin stopped to catch his breath. Tilly climbed up beside him, pressing her flank against his leg in silent support. He looked out over the rolling pasture, then down at Tilly's curious face. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he murmured. She answered with a soft bark, eyes warm. A breeze rustled the tall grass, carrying the faint hum of insects. Martin felt a swell of appreciation for the second chance at life he'd been granted, and for the dog who had opened his heart to so much more than he ever expected. He scratched Tilly behind the ears, letting his gaze sweep the horizon. Tomorrow, the barn would fill with new voices, dogs, and eager hearts wanting to learn from Tilly's example. Redwood's policy changes were no longer just words on paper. They were the impetus for real transformation, born from one man's final request that turned into a communal aspiration for compassion. "Let's get you inside," Martin said gently, patting Tilly's side. Together, they returned to the ranch house. The windows glowed with lamplight, and the porch welcomed them like an old friend. Jenna greeted them at the door, holding a small stack of newly arrived mail. "More letters from people asking about Tilly's next appearance," she joked. Martin smiled and eased inside, thankful that the ranch, once so quiet, now hummed with purpose. Tomorrow would bring new faces and new challenges, but Martin felt steady in a way he hadn't since his illness began. He owed much of it to Tilly. Her steadfast watch during his darkest hours, her quiet wisdom in bridging the gap between fear and hope. Tonight, with starlight flickering through the windows and a sense of calm in the air, Martin breathed easily, believing in the promise of what they were about to build. Tilly curled at his feet, a faithful sentinel, as if confirming that yes, a single dog's devotion truly could inspire a world of difference. Morning arrived with a whisper of autumn chill, and Martin woke early to prepare for the first official workshop at his barn. The small pilot program, set to last a single afternoon, had generated more buzz than he'd ever expected. A dozen eager participants, some with dogs, some without, would soon converge on the ranch, united by a desire to learn how animals could offer comfort and healing. Tilly seemed to sense the importance of the day. She paced near the front door as Martin sipped his tea, tail wagging in anticipation each time a vehicle rumbled in the distance. Jenna checked off items on a clipboard, her excitement tangible. "We've got chairs set up in the barn, plus a demonstration area near the hay bales," she explained. "Carmen's bringing a few props to simulate hospital equipment, and Dr. Alvarez is en route with pamphlets on infection control. Ms. Lewis called to confirm she'll be here too." Martin's eyebrows rose slightly at that last bit. He was still growing used to the notion that Redwood's once rigid official had become such an ally. But Tilly's calm trust in Ms. Lewis, shown during their final hospital meetings, had dissolved the last of his apprehension. They headed outside, where a bright sun illuminated the fields. Carmen arrived first, her trunk brimming with foam pads, folded screens, and a metal stand with adjustable clamps. She greeted Tilly like an old friend, kneeling to stroke her fur. "You ready to teach some new dogs your secrets?" she teased, as if Tilly might answer. Tilly gave a small bark and turned to Martin, who couldn't help but grin. Once the barn had been a quiet structure for storing hay and tools. Now Carmen and Jenna had converted a section into a rudimentary training arena. Sheets of plywood formed partitions, while bales of straw marked boundaries for group exercises. An improvised sign near the entrance read, "Therapy Dog Workshop, Welcome." One by one, participants trickled in. A middle-aged couple, arms wrapped around the leash of a calm-eyed golden retriever, introduced themselves as the Ryans. They explained that their dog, Honey, had a gentle nature and had comforted neighbors through tough times, so they hoped she could earn therapy certification. Next came a retired teacher, Miss Chang, who had no dog but a deep wish to volunteer with therapy animals. Her plan was to glean insights here before adopting a rescue. Other arrivals included a teenage boy with a rescued husky and an elderly woman hoping to help her terrier overcome shyness. Each carried a mixture of curiosity and nerves, but they relaxed upon seeing Tilly's friendly greeting and the easygoing layout of the barn. Dr. Alvarez and Ms. Lewis arrived together, stepping from a small SUV. Dr. Alvarez offered Martin a warm hug. "This is wonderful," she said, scanning the setup. "Look at all these folks ready to learn." Ms. Lewis inclined her head in greeting, no trace of her old sternness. She carried a folder of official documents and wore a smile that Martin guessed was half relief, half genuine excitement. Tilly wandered over, her posture as relaxed as if she were back at the hospital, weaving among new faces with gentle curiosity. To Martin, seeing Tilly so at ease confirmed they were on the right path. Carmen kicked off the workshop with basic instructions, inviting participants to gather on the barn's makeshift benches. "This isn't a formal certification course," she explained, "but a hands-on introduction. We'll practice techniques that help dogs navigate stressful environments like hospitals or nursing homes, while building the confidence of both dog and handler." She motioned for Tilly and Martin to join her up front. Many of you know their story. Tilly provided life-saving comfort to Martin during a critical illness and even alerted staff to emergencies. Today, they'll demonstrate the calm leadership and empathy a therapy dog needs. Martin took a slow breath, stepping forward. Though he felt a flare of stage fright, Tilly's presence settled him. "Hello," he said quietly, projecting his voice across the small group. "I'm not an expert trainer, but living through a health crisis taught me that dogs can sense our fears and reassure us in ways people can't always manage." Tilly acted by instinct, guided by loyalty. If you can tap into that bond, you'll be amazed at what your dog can do. For the next hour, Carmen led practical sessions. She introduced gentle restraint techniques, preparing a dog to remain calm if a patient made sudden movements. She guided them through, responding to unexpected noises, clattering metal trays, bursts of chatter, while maintaining composure. Dr. Alvarez spoke about infection control, reminding everyone that hospital settings demanded cleanliness and strict protocols. Ms. Lewis stood by, making notes on how Redwood's guidelines might adapt if more dog owner teams succeeded in these trainings. Each pair tried exercises in turn. Honey, the golden retriever, breezed through them with a poised grace that impressed everyone. The rescued husky proved anxious, trembling at sharp sounds, but Carmen coached the teenage handler on offering gentle reassurance. The shy terrier cowered initially. Tilly walked over, sniffing gently, and soon the terrier relaxed enough to mimic Tilly's calm stance. Miss Chang, lacking a dog, practiced basic leading skills with Tilly, who seemed perfectly happy to fill in. Martin watched it all, heart full. He'd only recently regained his own health, yet here he was, hosting a workshop that felt like a gift to others. After a short break, people gathered around Martin and Tilly for a casual Q&A. One participant asked, "How did you know Tilly would be allowed in the hospital given Redwood's tough stance?" Martin half smiled, recounting the struggle they'd faced, how Tilly's presence in emergencies forced Redwood to reconsider. Another asked if Tilly had any special training to detect medical issues. "She was just my ranch dog," Martin said, scratching Tilly's head affectionately. "But her loyalty ran deeper than I knew. Sometimes dogs sense changes in our bodies before we notice ourselves." Questions turned more personal. The Ryans, with their dog Honey at their side, wondered how Martin had balanced pride and vulnerability while ill. He looked to Tilly, then answered slowly, "I learned that it's not weakness to let someone, or some dog, help you. It takes courage to trust. And if you let that trust grow, it can save your life." The workshop ended on a high note, participants exchanging contact information and vowing to practice at home. Carmen announced she'd schedule follow-up sessions. Dr. Alvarez commended everyone, stating she'd be delighted to see well-prepared therapy dogs in her hospital soon. Ms. Lewis, flipping through her notes, told Martin with genuine warmth, "I think Redwood will be more open to formalizing these workshops. This pilot proves how much interest is out there." Jenna, beaming, offered slices of homemade banana bread as a parting snack. Attendees gathered under the shade of an old oak tree beside the barn, chatting about the day's lessons. Tilly roamed among them, receiving ear rubs and compliments in abundance. Martin allowed himself to breathe easily, leaning on his walker but feeling a deep satisfaction. He wasn't sure what shape the future would take, but the possibilities felt boundless. This place, once a quiet ranch for a solitary man, now echoed with laughter and purposeful learning. After everyone departed, the yard fell back into its familiar hush. Carmen stayed behind to help tidy up, packing away foam pads and screens. Ms. Lewis assisted, talking quietly about potential collaborations with other counties. Martin overheard phrases like regional outreach and expanding the pilot, phrases that once would have sounded too grand to consider. But now they filled him with cautious optimism. By the barn door, Dr. Alvarez gave Martin a quick hug. "You've accomplished so much," she said. "Thank you for letting me witness it." She drove off, leaving Martin and Jenna with Ms. Lewis, who lingered by the fence, watching Tilly chase grasshoppers. "I never told you," Ms. Lewis admitted softly, "but I had a relative who died alone in a hospice where animals weren't allowed. It always haunted me. When I saw Tilly comfort you and Nora, it was like glimpsing all the good that could have been." Her voice wavered. "That's why I became so determined to change the rules." Martin gave a sympathetic nod, understanding the sorrow that fueled her resolve. Tilly, as if sensing Ms. Lewis's emotion, trotted over and nuzzled her hand. Ms. Lewis smiled through glistening eyes. "She's extraordinary," she whispered. "Keep me updated on everything you do here." With that, Ms. Lewis said her goodbyes, leaving Martin, Jenna, and Tilly to watch her car vanish down the dirt road. They carried the last workshop materials into the barn. Martin leaned against a stack of hay bales, fatigue creeping in. Jenna wrapped an arm around him. "You all right?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Just tired, but a good kind of tired." Tilly hopped atop a low bale, peering at Martin with an inquisitive tilt of her head. He reached to stroke her fur. "We did well today. Thank you, girl." Jenna locked up the barn, and the three of them returned to the house under a sky tinged with the pink hues of early evening. Inside, Martin settled on the couch, Tilly jumping up to curl beside him. Jenna lit a lamp, the warm glow revealing an array of notes and brochures on the kitchen table, remnants of their new calling. Martin closed his eyes, letting the day's events wash over him. Not so long ago, he'd been fighting for each breath in a stark hospital room. Now, he was forging a path that might help others heal. The contrast felt surreal and profoundly humbling. Jenna brought him a glass of water, her voice gentle. "I'm proud of you, Dad, and Tilly too. Who would have guessed your final wish would lead to all of this?" Martin opened his eyes, spotting Tilly's relaxed form at his side. He recalled lying in that hospital bed, so certain he was out of time. That simple request to be with his dog had unlocked a journey he never could have foreseen, a journey of second chances for himself and countless others. "You know," Martin said, voice quiet, "life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." Tilly roused at the sound of his words, blinking as if to agree. Jenna pulled over a chair, resting her chin on her hand. "What do you think comes next?" she asked. Martin thought of Redwood's policy changes, the workshop, the pilot program, the stories they'd shared with hospital staff. Then he reached out to Tilly, laying a hand on her soft coat. "We keep going," he answered simply. "We help more people find this connection, and I keep living. Grateful every day for the second chance Tilly gave me." The hush that followed felt sacred. A late summer breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of hay and distant fields. Tilly, satisfied that Martin was at peace, rested her head on his lap. Jenna, tears edging her lashes, smiled at the tableau before her. Tomorrow, the ranch would wake to new possibilities, but tonight, they cherished the calm. They had come from the brink, forging not just a bond that saved a life, but a path that might save many more. Martin smoothed Tilly's fur, leaning back against the cushions. Outside, the horizon deepened to violet, stars flickering faintly overhead. Hope pulsed in the hush of that country evening, a promise that hearts opened by compassion could guide the world toward gentler ways. Tilly exhaled, drifting into doggy dreams. Martin let his own eyes close, a quiet prayer of gratitude on his lips. The final request had indeed been fulfilled, yet what blossomed from it was an ongoing story, one of love, loyalty, and the healing power found in the simplest, most extraordinary bond.